The conversation at lunch drifted, as it always did lately, toward the event everyone was pretending not to obsess over. Familiar summoning. It was happening that afternoon. From the gossip Wolfe overheard, every first year witch was praying for an exceptional draw. For some of them, a strong familiar wasn't a luxury. It was the difference between scraping into minor nobility or being pushed down into the commoner lane for the rest of their lives. Their future depended on one thing: how fast their power grew. And familiars mattered for two reasons. First was the species. Some creatures could pull more mana. Some could filter it into a form that a witch could absorb more easily. The second factor was compatibility, how well a familiar fit its witch, which apparently couldn't be confirmed until the bond actually formed. At least, that was how Wolfe understood it. Ella was talented enough that she'd pass first year no matter what she summoned. But passing wasn't the real goal. Titles weren't handed out for good effort. To climb beyond being a baroness with a small estate and a pretty name, you needed wealth and power, or ridiculous power. And Ella didn't have wealth. She came from a normal non-witch family, which meant no vaults full of crystals and no noble network ready to carry her upward. Cassie had the opposite problem. Her power might not be the best in the room, but she had the Noxus family behind her. As long as she survived first year without scandals, her title would be more decoration than limit. Influence didn't always come from law. Sometimes it came from who stood behind you. Asia rested her chin on her hand and looked Wolfe over like she was evaluating a new tool. "So, Wolfe," she asked, "why our table? You had your pick of the room." Wolfe didn't hesitate. "I got here early yesterday with Cassie. She's a friend from the city and Ella's roommate. Ella and Cassie helped me settle in, answered questions, didn't treat me like a stray. Good first impression." He tilted his head slightly. "And Merk, the student council president's assistant, recommended Ella too." Two unrelated references. That's usually a safe bet. Then Wolfe leaned closer and lowered his voice. "Also, she's kind of cute when she blushes." Asia burst out laughing, loud enough to turn heads. "I like you," she said, wiping at her eyes. "We're going to get along. And this weekend the pool opens. Swimming practice starts again. You should come." Wolfe blinked. "Practice? The academy does sports." "Not officially," Asia said with a shrug. "But we do anyway. Staying in shape matters. Most witches hate exercise, so they nuked gym class ages ago. They just leave the facilities open unless someone reserves them." Wolfe was about to ask more, curious how their training compared to the gyms he'd grown up in. But the warning bell cut them off. Ella stood up instantly like she'd been waiting for it. "Move," she said, grabbing Wolfe by the sleeve and Cassie by the hand. "Last entrance sorting is familiar summoning. Practical skills classroom." Class A's practical room sat on the far side of the academy, close to the stairwell that led down into the potion bunker beneath the school. Wolfe didn't miss the detail. Anything that could explode was kept underground, behind thick walls. Smart. The teacher greeted them at the door, sharp-eyed and already annoyed at the idea of teenage witches being near carefully drawn circles. "Everyone take a position beside a marked summoning circle," the teacher ordered. "Don't smudge them. Don't damage them." Her gaze landed on Wolfe. "You're Wolfe, yes? Good. Even on your day off, you showed up. Take the paint pen. If someone ruins a circle, you fix it." A few girls chuckled. Then it sank in what that meant. If they messed up, Wolfe would be kneeling beside them to repair the circle, while they stood there in academy summer uniforms that ended mid-thigh. The laughter got a lot quieter. The teacher clapped once. "Lines. Now." The class shifted into formation. Ella and Cassie took a spot near the back corner. Near the front was a tiny witch in a fuzzy pink hoodie that looked like she'd walked into the wrong building and decided it was everyone else's problem. Wolfe took his place near the board, eyes flicking between the chalked example circle and the floor markings, memorizing every rune and spacing like his life depended on it. Some girls near the middle were whispering and shuffling their feet. Wolfe tapped the whiteboard with the marker. Not hard. Just enough sound. Every head snapped up. Every foot stopped moving. The teacher's mouth curved with approval. "Strong fighter," she said, amused. "And excellent student compatibility so far." I'll have to thank the Noxus family for sending you. Wolfe smiled politely and said nothing. The teacher turned to the class. I drew these circles myself. They should be correct. If you see scuffs or missing lines, report it. The reference circle is on the board. Cassie raised her hand immediately. Mine has an incorrect rune. Wolfe walked over with the template in hand. The paint had been running out. The rune was half-formed, then someone had tried to fix it and made it worse. Wolfe wiped it clean with an enchanted solvent cloth and redrew it in one smooth, confident motion. He checked the angles. Checked the spacing. Checked the breaks. Perfect. Other issues surfaced too. A gap in Ella's inner ring. A thin line on another student's outer circle. Wolfe fixed them one by one, fast and clean, without making a big deal out of it. Then the teacher wrote a chant on the board. You can all handle this, she said. Even without a fully developed aura, familiar summoning is possible if you can cast. Results depend on luck and talent. You need enough talent to maintain the spell. And enough luck to pull something worth bonding. She paced slowly as she spoke. Most common summons are mice and cats. Mice are considered low value, but still better than failure. Treat them well. Her eyes narrowed. If you summon an all-black cat, they sometimes speak human language. Other species may have special traits. We will address them as they appear. She tapped the chant on the board. Repeat this. Focus on what you truly want in a companion. The single most important quality. Continue until mist fills the circle and your familiar manifests. If anything happens at all, it's working. Do not stop. Wolfe returned to the front and sat where he could observe without being in anyone's way. Honestly, compared to running deliveries, this job was a vacation. The room filled with chanting. Some voices loud. Some barely audible. Mist began to bloom over the circles like fog rolling in. After a minute, the teacher moved through the rows, correcting a few sluggish circles with quick, precise tweaks. Most of the mist stayed consistent in size, growing denser rather than wider. Except one near the front. That cloud pulsed and expanded wildly, as if something inside it was struggling against the boundary. Wolfe watched, curious. Then the cloud popped. A wet, gelatinous splatter wrapped across Wolfe's arms and chest, sticky and cold. A few students gasped and lost focus, their chanting stuttering. The slime immediately peeled back off Wolfe like it realized it had made a mistake. Then, almost apologetically, it formed into a wave shape and collapsed in a neat little bow. Wolfe stood there, dripping, blinking. Okay, he muttered. The summoning continued. The tiny girl in the pink hoodie, Mary, summoned a huge long-haired dog with snow-white fur. She screamed in joy, bouncing in place so loudly the teacher had to cast a sound isolation spell around her to keep her from ruining everyone else's focus. More familiars appeared. Mostly small, mundane creatures. Then Krista Abilene summoned the ugliest little green goblin Wolfe had ever seen in his life. Wolfe didn't know what the bond conversation looked like, but Krista was currently beating it with a tightly rolled stack of papers. Someone should probably remind her that if it was truly a familiar, she could just order it. As the room settled into a rhythm, Wolfe felt something else. A steady pull. Like a drain opening inside his chest. Mana was leaving him. Not in a burst, but in a continuous flow, bleeding away into the air. His eyes flicked toward the back corner. 2 circles. 2 clouds. Cassie and Ella. Their mist was darker, denser, heavier than the others, and it wasn't stable. It surged and buckled like it was about to break the rules of the room. Wolfe tried to keep his face neutral. This wasn't a room where a man could casually say, "Hey, I think your spell is draining my mana." Not when half the girls likely grew up hearing that male magic users were monsters who deserved to be hunted. The pull got worse. His skin prickled. His vision sharpened in that unpleasant way it did when your body was running low on something important. Then the teacher spoke, voice suddenly precise. Wolfe. Stand up carefully. Step this way. Wolfe rose, slow, doing exactly what he was told. The teacher's eyes weren't worried. They were interested. That was worse. Before Wolfe could ask what was happening, the air twisted. The room warped like heat shimmer. And in the blink of an eye, Wolfe was no longer at the front. He was in the back corner, standing between Cassie and Ella. Both girls were inside their summoning circles now, in the exact center. And the dense black clouds that had been filling the circles were gone. What am I doing back here? Wolfe blurted, then the question died in his throat. Something was horribly wrong. Mana was being ripped through him like someone had hooked a pump to his spine. It wasn't a gentle pull the way witches described drawing from crystals. This was violent, starving, frantic, like the spell didn't care whether Wolfe survived as long as it got what it wanted. His skin crawled. His bones ached. Then the pain turned sharp, spreading everywhere at once, like his body was being torn open from the inside. He'd felt pain before. Real pain. He'd been hit by a delivery truck once and shattered his leg. That had been brutal. This was worse. This was everywhere. Everywhere except one small, strange place in his chest, where his mana pouch sat like a tiny island untouched by the storm. A pocket of calm in a body that felt like it was coming apart. He'd emptied himself on purpose before class. No reserve, no signature, nothing that could get him noticed. Now he cursed that decision with his whole soul. He didn't have stored mana to buffer the pull, so he did the only thing he could. He started drawing mana in as fast as possible. Raw, greedy, desperate. He didn't care anymore if anyone saw. That tearing sensation was going to kill him if he didn't stop it right now, and Wolfe was completely sure of that. Two faint lights flickered near his mana pouch, one violet and one powder blue, like anchors holding his mind together while everything else threatened to snap. Then, just as his vision started to blur, the pain suddenly eased. Not gone, but receding, like something had finally latched and didn't need to keep chewing him apart. Wolfe didn't waste the mercy. He filled his mana capacity hard and fast, building a reserve in case the spell tried to take another bite. That's when the runes etched into his arm warmed. Letters that only he could see began to form, written by the inheritance spell itself. Supplicant bond offer obtained. Accept. 3 seconds to default answer. Wolfe stared at it, mind still ringing, thoughts sliding around like they couldn't grip anything. What was all he managed? The countdown ended. Bonds accepted. Witch Mariel. Witch Noxus. Wolfe blinked, still trying to understand what accepted even meant, when the teacher's voice reached him through the noise in his skull. I must say, that was unexpected. Excellent work. A pause. Now, which of you succeeded, and who needs to start over? I did, Ella said. I did, Cassie said at the exact same time. Then they turned and glared at each other like the words were a challenge. The teacher's brows rose. You can't both have succeeded. One of you must have failed. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the circles. Unless, she hesitated, then spoke carefully. If either of you summoned a human familiar, draw mana through your bond. If it's real, the familiar's eyes will glow with your aura. Ella and Cassie obeyed. And the teacher gasped. Wolfe felt it instantly. 2 constant draws, one from each of them, tugging at his reserve like they were both plugged into him at once. His mana pouch automatically tried to balance, feeding their much weaker auras like a stabilizer system. That realization landed like a punch. He hadn't just been standing near their circles. He had been pulled into them. Summoned. Bonded. A familiar. Or something worse, depending on how the inheritance counted it. 3 seconds. Wolfe rasped, finding his voice. That's a ridiculous default. Does it know how much that hurt? Every head in the room turned toward him. The teacher's expression sharpened. So you saw the notification. Then tell me, who is your master? Wolfe stared at her. First of all, I'm not a slave. I work here. The teacher pinched the bridge of her nose like she'd just developed a headache with a name and face. Fine. Wolfe. Who bonded you? You should feel a pull. An affinity. Try sending mana through the bond and we'll confirm. Wolfe swallowed. No point fighting it. I'm already in too deep. He pushed a controlled surge through both bonds. Ella's knees buckled instantly. Cassie collapsed at the same time. Wolfe caught them both on reflex, arms tightening around 2 half-fainting girls while the entire class stared like they'd just watched a rule of the world break in half. The teacher's voice snapped out, decisive. You 3 stay here. Then, louder, class, you're dismissed as soon as you finish summoning. Spend the rest of the day bonding with your familiars. Students began to leave in bursts, excited cries, animals in arms, tails and wings and paws everywhere. Only one remained besides Wolfe, Cassie, and Ella, Mary and her huge white dog. A sound isolation spell still wrapped them, and Mary was too distracted hugging her familiar to notice anything else. As the room emptied, the teacher suddenly called after the others, like she'd remembered something important too late. Form study groups before the end of next week. Nobody listened. Or if they did, nobody cared. A moment later, the air in the corner of the room shifted. The headmistress seemed to step out of shadow, as if she'd been there the entire time and only now bothered to be visible. Her gaze swept the room like a blade. "How," she demanded, "do you mess up familiar summoning badly enough to require assistance?" The teacher didn't even flinch. They both summoned the same human. The headmistress went still for one long beat. Then she exhaled. "All right. We can fix this." She paused. "Or maybe it doesn't need fixing. What's their compatibility?" The teacher nodded grimly. "We have the device." She pulled out a small stone tablet and placed it on the desk. It looked ancient, but the runes across it shimmered like fresh ink. "Hands," the teacher said. "Skin contact. Channel mana. Either direction is fine." Ella stepped forward first. Wolfe quickly filled his mana to about half. Enough for a reliable reading, enough to avoid the same agony he'd just survived, and enough to make sure Ella wouldn't be humiliated in front of her class. Ella placed her hand on his. Energy surged. Ella's breath hitched. Her thighs tightened. Her knees almost folded. The tablet flashed. Compatibility, 97%. The room fell into complete silence. The teacher lunged forward to steady Ella as she gasped, eyes unfocused, staring longingly at the floor like it was the safest place on earth. "Again," the teacher said, voice tight. "Anything over 90 is unheard of." She looked between them like she couldn't decide whether she was amazed or horrified. "You two would have to be nearly perfectly aligned to score like that." Ella hesitated, clearly not thrilled to repeat whatever that just did to her, but Wolfe restored his mana to the same level and nodded once. The teacher braced Ella this time. The reaction was the same. The tablet flashed again. Compatibility, 97.1%. The teacher's expression hardened. "It's settled. Ella, you don't need further tests." "Cassie, step forward." Cassie did, jaw set, eyes sharp with a kind of stubborn pride. Her hand met Wolfe's. Energy surged again. She collapsed even faster than Ella had. The tablet flashed. Compatibility, 97%. The teacher caught Cassie and lowered her into a chair, then stared at the tablet like it had personally insulted her education. "What do we do?" the teacher asked the headmistress, voice low. With compatibility this high, severing the bonds would cripple them. Her eyes flicked to Wolfe. "And sharing a familiar, especially a humanoid familiar, is unorthodox." Then her tone tightened further. "And he's still up for trial soon." The headmistress didn't answer immediately. She looked thoughtful, too thoughtful, like she was deciding between options Wolfe didn't want to imagine. That was when a new voice piped up, cheerful and completely out of place. Mary had slipped out of her isolation bubble, her huge white dog trotting beside her like a guardian. She stared up at Wolfe with genuine curiosity. "I didn't think the device could give a high compatibility score with a male human," she said plainly. "I mean, I love my new dog. I named him Pup. He's male too. But he's fluffy." "You're not fluffy." Mary's eyes narrowed as if this was the real crime. How could there be compatibility? Wolfe blinked, then offered the best answer he could think of. "Maybe compatibility isn't about species. Maybe it's about overlap. If two people like the same things, they sync better." Mary considered that seriously, nodding like a scholar. "Plausible." She glanced at the headmistress and teacher. "I'll ask the book club. They research weird topics. Someone might know." Then she pointed at Wolfe. "But don't get ideas. You'll never be truly suitable if you aren't fluffy." Wolfe couldn't help it. He smiled. "You look like you'd make an excellent pillow. Maybe you stole all the softness from the rest of the room." Mary's face lit up like she'd been complimented in the highest language. Fluff is life, she declared. Then she leaned in, lowering her voice conspiratorially. There's one more thing you should know. Wolfe sighed. Sure. Might as well. Rip the bandage off. Mary nodded gravely, like she was sharing forbidden knowledge. The best time to be close to your familiar is when you're asleep. I've never heard of a witch and familiar that didn't sleep together. Wolfe's smile froze. He looked at Ella. Then Cassie. And suddenly, that unorthodox problem the teacher mentioned didn't feel theoretical at all. It felt immediate. And it felt like a disaster that was going to require a very serious conversation, very soon.
Hey everyone, welcome to our channel, and thank you for your support. If there's a favorite novel on the channel and you want the next part, you're just one step away. Become a Patreon member and I can make it depending on your tier. Thank you for your attention.
The headmistress didn't take much longer to break from her reverie and come to a decision. We will leave this arrangement as it is. Wolfe, you will no longer be a hall monitor. As a familiar, your responsibility is to your witches, so you will go to classes with them when required, like any other familiar. As far as sleeping arrangements, I am not going to ask, and as a ward of the academy, until your investigation is done, you still have a room of your own. You will still be the teacher's assistant in the afternoon practical skills class since there isn't a replacement, and both of your witches are here anyhow. The headmistress instructed. We will also be adding someone to your study group. Reiko Morgan, the Coven leader's youngest daughter. Her existing social group was determined to be a bad influence by her mother, so I hope you can help turn her around and keep her on track. They hadn't officially formed their study group yet, but both Cassie and Ella had a pretty good idea of who it could include. Though, with only 10 total people in the class and the regular class students being on such a different level than the class of first years, there wasn't really much to choose from. Go get something to eat. Learn about your familiars, and don't feed your dog chocolate or candies, Mary. Get your study groups organized, and we will see you next week. The teacher ordered them before physically shoving them out the door to talk to the headmistress. An impressive feat for a woman as small and old as she was. Well, let's go to the cafeteria. All the seniors should be there waiting on us to arrive. Can you imagine the look on their face at this super fluffy puppy? Mary asked. Nope. But it's going to be great, Wolfe answered. He could guarantee that it wasn't the pup that was going to cause the next wave of gossip in the lunchroom, though. By the time they arrived, the cafeterias were all completely packed, and there were first-year students everywhere in the hallways. They couldn't even get close to their goal. The tall blonde witch known as Reiko was near the main floor doors to the dorm rooms with a small creature in her arms. It was wrapped up in a blue wool blanket, so Wolfe couldn't tell what it was, but she seemed happy about her familiar, unlike Krista, who had physically restrained her goblin with multiple ropes and was the butt of many jokes among the others born from upper noble families. Hey Reiko, did you get the memo about the study group? Mary called out, as most of the sports-minded group from the regular class came out to join them with their new familiars. Some were missing, either still trying or having failed, but the vast majority had some sort of familiar with them. I did. It's a pleasure to meet you all. Reiko answered with a polite smile. Why don't we all head to the gardens out back? I saw benches there where we can talk, away from the crowds. Wolfe suggested. That would be pleasant. I will ask the staff to bring a light snack. Reiko agreed in true noble fashion, then paused and blushed. Sorry, I forgot we were at the academy, where things are different. Should we grab something on our way? She stammered. How about I grab drinks and snacks and meet you all there? I assume you all know each other from this morning, but I would also guess that you didn't interact much. Wolfe suggested. Taking the back way to the staff cafeteria to grab refreshments, Wolfe passed by the entrance to the running track and pools, finding a small group gathered there, looking through the locked door, as the facility wasn't open for the semester yet. It opens tomorrow, and a group of upperclassmen, including some Class A witches, will be there to practice and socialize. If you want to meet them, I suggest you come. Wolfe suggested. Do you think they will welcome us? I mean, it is also the second and third year witches, right? One of the new students asked. I met them today, and I am certain they will. The academy doesn't have sports teams, so the witches that want to practice physical skills outside of combat classes group together on their own. Wolfe told them. He would remind the girls about the event once he made it to the garden. They could always use more friends. Thanks, Wolfe. You're way cooler than what the others said. One of the girls cheered, giving Wolfe a fist bump before he left for the staff cafeteria. He got the drinks and snacks in only a few seconds, as the staff had been expecting such a request, but his group wasn't the only one in the gardens by the time he made it there, and some familiar faces had joined them. A few groups of witches from the other classes were there as well, for the same reason, escaping the crowd inside who were all gushing over the newly summoned familiars. The cafeteria had finger sandwiches and iced tea ready, Wolfe announced as he arrived with his haul in 2 large containers. You're a lifesaver. But what took you so long? Ella asked. There were a bunch of students checking out the pool and track. I stopped to chat, and they're going to come to visit the regulars tomorrow when the pool opens. I heard that some of our local witches have a thing for handsome girls with toned abs, so I didn't think the group would mind. Swim team girls, was it? I'm in. Maybe I can find a new partner. Candy answered a bit too quickly. That is the normal way of things. These initial study groups only usually last a few months unless there is a group assignment. All 5 of my older sisters went through the same thing when they were in the academy. Reiko explained, missing the meaning behind Candy's words. Oh, are any of them still here? They could be valuable assistants when you're stuck on a spell. Ella suggested, but Reiko shook her head. The next is 3 years older than me, so she graduated last year. You heard about the old student council treasurer, right? Reiko asked, and all the girls nodded. Everyone agrees that she was such a bitch, though. How did you end up so nice? Asia asked, and Wolfe almost choked on his tongue. This was not the cute witch academy idol behavior his fantasies and the media had sold him on. Reiko shook her head in dismay. If you thought she was bad here, you should see her at home where there aren't any rules to stop her. If I make it through this year, I am asking for a transferred position upon graduation. Even a wilderness administrator or monster control assignment. Anything to not go back to the city. Wilderness administrator? The news in the city said that nobody actually lived out in the wilderness other than in a few fortified villages, only monsters and mutants. Wolfe knew the city news hid more than a few things from them, but how much didn't he know about the world? Could there be places where people really lived normal lives outdoors, away from the control of the Coven? If it were an option, spending time in the wilderness away from prying eyes would really help him build his strength as a Magi. Once he had better control, he could even challenge the monsters and get rich off their bodies. There were a lot of valuable spell ingredients in a monster's body. When they ended their meeting, both Reiko and Mary, along with all the sports fans and Cassie, had agreed to come to the pool in the morning to swim and meet new people, which meant Wolfe needed another trip to the storage area. He hadn't picked up swim trunks because he hadn't thought he would have a need for them here. He wondered what he should pick. Long shorts? A Speedo? No, that was too tacky for someone who wasn't a professional swimmer. The decision was made for him in the supply room. There was a free Academy logo set of gym clothes, including swim shorts, and it was all that was currently available for men's swimwear. Wolfe had missed that fact yesterday when he picked out his training outfits. It also came with very light running shoes and a pair of swim goggles, in case you needed them or wanted to truly train your aquatic skills. Back in his room, Wolfe could finally meditate, or at least try to. The events of the day and the 2 witches he was bonded to kept circling in his mind, breaking his concentration so badly that he was struggling to maintain the even pressure that was needed to cause a change in his mana pouch. He would get to see them again in the morning and spend the day at the pool getting to know everyone, so there was no reason for him to be so nervous and distracted. Still, Wolfe couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen tomorrow. He would have his mana supply empty, and he had already proven that the skill to hide his existing talent was working. Nobody seemed to have noticed it during the tests or during class today. So, what could this feeling be? Or was it a result of the familiar bond? The headmistress didn't mention anything about separation anxiety that Wolfe could recall. Wolfe had finished his meditation for the evening and was just getting settled into bed when there was a knock at his door. He cracked it open to see who was visiting him so late at night, and a pajama-clad Ella snuck past him and closed the door behind her. I was talking to Cassie, getting to know her since we now share a lifelong bond, when she let slip a very interesting detail. It seems her aura stabilized just by holding your hand and the aura wand you carved. She whispered. She was very close to forming her aura, I guess. Cassie is a very talented witch. Wolfe dismissed her concerns. She also told me just how good it felt when you held her while she worked on spell circles. Ella smirked. Wolfe only smiled for a second, then opened his arms. I can hold you and make you feel good as well. In fact, with our bond as a magic user and familiar, you could say that is my duty. We will get to that. But what I wanted to say was neither of those things is a normal event, and calmly reassuring the nubile young witch in his lap so she could focus on her work isn't what a man with no knowledge of mana would do in that situation. He would freak out or maybe get turned on, but he would definitely be startled. From what she told me, you weren't at all surprised. You could already sense mana, couldn't you? That's why you wear gloves with your uniform, so nobody can physically touch you. With that, she grabbed Wolfe's bare hand in both of hers. As he had just finished filling his mana pouch, he couldn't pass the imbalance off as anything else, so he did the only thing he could think of and froze. Ella began drawing mana from him and integrating it into her aura the way Cassie did in the vehicle on the way to school, only Ella was going faster and couldn't, or wasn't trying to, hide the effect. The more she drew from his storage into her aura, the more pronounced the effect got until she began not so discreetly rubbing against him, trying to relieve the tingling feeling in her body as she integrated the mana that Wolfe had stored. Wolfe couldn't take the panting and moaning anymore, so he picked her up, with one hand under each firm bottom cheek, and lay her on the bed. Did she tell you that the feeling was more manageable with more skin contact? That's what she told me. Wolfe whispered, then wrapped her up in his arms and began to feed her mana with their bodies pressed together. Wolfe, you have to warn a girl before you do that. I almost passed out. Ella whispered. You're not finished, are you? I'm just getting started with you. Wolfe replied, gently stroking her back. What? I don't think I can take much more. I should go back before Cassie wakes up alone. Ella stammered, with a deep blush lighting up her face as she realized the conversation had taken a much different turn than she had imagined on her way here. Wolfe slowly began to pull mana back from her aura into his storage, leaving him with more than he began the process with, then pushed it all back to Ella, enhancing her aura once again. The sensation was exquisite, and her kisses began to roam his body while Wolfe circulated the mana between them. Her soft mouth was the end of him, and Wolfe barely held out longer than Ella had the first time he fed her mana before she was wiping the remains of his pleasure from her lips. Oh goddess, swallowing that was a mistake, but in a good way. I can feel the mana inside me. My whole body is hot. Is that what you feel like all the time? She whispered. I don't think so. Mana doesn't make me feel warm, but I hope you will make sure that this particular secret technique doesn't make it past you and Cassie. You know how most of the other students feel about any chance to get a hold of even a bit more power, and they will surely be suspicious of your progress, even if we can blame some of it on me being a familiar now. Wolfe still had well over 90% of his storage capacity remaining, but what he had transferred was enough to turn Ella into a quivering mess. If others found that part out before connecting all the dots, being killed as a Magi might be the least of his concerns. I already cautioned her to keep everything that she told me strictly secret, but I think the teachers that were with you might know, and the headmistress will have figured it out by now. I really have to go, though. Cassie made me promise not to get a head start. See you tomorrow at the pool. Ella replied, straightening her clothes and sneaking back out the door after making sure the hallway was clear. The pool. Wolfe wasn't sure how he was going to look at Ella the same way after seeing her like that. All he could think of was bringing her back to finish what they had started. Sleep wasn't going to happen, so Wolfe tried to meditate again. As he gathered mana and focused on his body, he noticed there had been some major changes. His muscles absorbed mana more easily than they had yesterday, and his bones were beginning to gain a light coating of mana. Was this the so-called familiar bond, the changes that enhanced familiars after prolonged or intense exposure to a witch's aura? It was multiplying the effects of his own meditation for the first hour after Ella left, then it faded back to the nearly imperceptible gains he was accustomed to. "Oh, Ella, you magnificent little witch, you have no idea of the gift you have given me tonight," Wolfe told the empty room as he calculated the gains that he could make while spending every night with the witches. According to the guidebook in his room, the pool had changing rooms and towels provided, with access to the gym through a side door. Like the room doors, the lockers were biometric locks, so you didn't need to carry a key with you, but Wolfe could see that being an issue after too long in the pool. If it did become an issue, he could always hit the gym after swimming. The academy didn't seem to plan on stopping him from doing anything but leaving before his trial. For the second time in one night, someone was knocking at his door, making Wolfe wonder if the pursuit of a quiet day at the academy was just a dream. "Wolfe, get up. The pool is open. Just wear your gym clothes over. We like to go for a workout before lunch. It helps the digestion." Asia, one of the girls from the sports-minded group who had joined them for lunch the other day, called through the door. Then Wolfe heard her leave at an energetic jog. Time had passed faster than he had thought, and it was no longer night, as he had thought it was, so Wolfe got dressed and headed out. Unexpectedly, he found the student council president and her assistant grabbing a very early breakfast when he stopped at the staff cafeteria, the only one that had a full meal set up this early in the morning. "Early morning pool days already? You'll be the best toned familiar in no time. And count them 2 witches for our lucky rookie." Merc laughed as Wolfe grabbed a muffin, then reconsidered and grabbed a whole tray of them. "My witches are high energy for sure, but you don't look like you're getting fat and lazy either. Perhaps you will be joining us?" Wolfe asked Merc while the president shook her head. "We're too busy these days. Maybe once everyone is settled in and all the usual beginning-of-the-year type conflicts are all sorted out. Student council also deals with roommate issues," she explained. Hundreds of witches who had never shared or been denied anything in their lives were suddenly told that they couldn't bring their personal effects and that they were sharing a room with a stranger. What could possibly go wrong in that scenario? Other than everything. Wolfe didn't envy the president even a little bit at that moment. He wasn't the only one among the pool attendees that thought of breakfast, and there was an assortment of foods and drinks on the tables at the edge of the room when Wolfe arrived. Everyone was still in their gym clothes, having a morning meet and greet along with the athletic upperclassmen and the freshly summoned familiars. Most of the second and third-year witches had brought their roommates as well, and Cassie waved happily from her spot among some senior classmen as she saw Wolfe come in with muffins. "Oh, the guest of honor, my beloved blueberry muffin, long time no see." One of the witches cheered, grabbing one off of the tray. "Hello, everyone. It looks like you got a pretty good turnout this time," Wolfe announced, noticing a large number of first-year students. They were a bit nervous, but most of the crowd wasn't from Class A, so it helped them relax a little and not feel too inferior or intimidated. The energetic girl known as Candy also helped. Seeing the girls who had come prepared for a competitive swim, she became the witchy equivalent of a shark in the waters. It was almost guaranteed that she would drag one or more off for compatibility testing of their own sort today. The woman was an unstoppable force of nature. With a light snack in them and a lot of conversation, the talk inevitably turned competitive. Candy had challenged a pair of girls to a race, and the upperclassmen had their own plans for a competition. "All right, everyone who is swimming, go get changed and be back here in 5 minutes." Risa, the unofficial leader of the group, announced. It didn't take long until everyone got changed and tossed their clothes in a locker, then gathered up by Risa for the competition plans. "All right, first up, there has been a challenge from Candy to a pair of her fellow first years to prove that they are actually fit enough to compete. I think we will all enjoy this one." Candy was a competitive swimmer all through grade school. "After that, we have a challenge among the fourth years, and finally a challenge from myself to Wolfe Noxus," Risa declared. "I knew he wouldn't get away with that joke." One of the older girls laughed, earning a glare from Risa. Wolfe had expected a lot of slender athletic bodies in this group, but some of them were hiding surprising assets under their uniforms. Candy, for one, but also Risa, who must bind her chest at school, and surprisingly Cassie, who had looked rather formless under her loose civilian clothing when he met her. Cassie and Ella came to sit with Wolfe while Candy and the girls that she had challenged took their places. How was your first full day at the academy? Wolfe asked Cassie as she settled into a chair. Don't remind me. It's a nightmare. I scored too high on the test, so the high nobles felt insulted, and they're really mean people except Reiko. Then there was the whole summoning incident, and now the familiar link isn't working correctly. Cassie sighed. Wolfe gave her a soft hug. At least you can make friends here. But what do you mean the familiar link is not working correctly? Cassie shook her head. Bullying isn't going to be the major issue. I'm sure I can make even more friends. But the link is concerning. A witch should be able to summon their familiar from anywhere in the vicinity, but Ella and I tried this morning, and you didn't even wake up. We will have to ask the teachers about it on Monday. Wolfe had no idea how to apologize to someone for becoming a defective familiar if that was even what he was. His inheritance didn't call him their familiar. It just said they were bonded. It wasn't something that you could just fix with words, and he didn't know enough to even suggest a solution. He did have a few ideas about how they could strengthen the bond, though, each one better than the last. At least Professor Ashcroft likes you. Spending half the day in potions would suck if she didn't like you. Ella tried to console her. That makes it worse. She threatened to put me alone at a table by her desk because I'm already ahead of the others. Elder Maria? Wolfe asked quietly, and Cassie nodded. As a cripple and non-witch, Elder Maria wasn't supposed to be able to create potions successfully. But she clearly still had the skills, or at least the knowledge, to teach Cassie. We will think of something. You can't force people to stop being jealous, but since we share a familiar, I think Professor Ashcroft will let me switch tables even if she wanted to put you in the front. Ella assured her. Wolfe would also be there all day at the start because the newest students weren't expected to be able to successfully use enough mana to create the potions without their familiar, so she wouldn't be completely alone at the table either way. I just need to follow Grandma's advice and get far enough ahead to crush the others so badly on the exams that their opinion doesn't matter, Cassie replied with a nostalgic smile. Then the first things you need are defensive spells and someone helping you build power outside class. Wolfe can help you with both of those, can't he? Risa asked, joining them to watch the races. Mary and Reiko both arrived late, bringing the last of the study group to the pool. Sorry, we were late. I didn't realize you would be eating here. Mary was looking forward to. Where did Mary go? Reiko introduced herself. One of the girls has a bunny for a familiar. She got sidetracked. Ella laughed, pointing to where the two had retreated to a table to hold an intense discussion. Candy had finished her challenge, and the loser of the race was sent to get a refill on the drinks, while the other two witches openly flirted. While they waited, the gathering naturally broke into smaller groups, with Candy, Asia, and Mary gathering their fluffy familiars at one table and Wolfe, Ella, Reiko, and Cassie at the one next to them, along with the small red-scaled lizard that was Reiko's familiar. Unfortunately, these study groups don't usually last long. Reiko sighed. She had said the same thing in different words yesterday, and Wolfe wondered if she was a bit lonely already and not looking forward to studying alone. Don't worry. We won't let you escape so easily. You already told us your deepest, darkest secret. Ella told her, referring to the young noble's desire to leave the city. Reiko's face brightened up immediately at that comment, while her little lizard, Flame, made a happy squeal and let off a wave of heat. If you don't mind, I'm in. My sisters taught me a lot of things about how to maximize your growth rate, and I'm sure Wolfe can handle hanging around the three of us and Flame. It's only the weak familiars who get exhausted from the bonds draw in class. Wolfe hadn't realized until now, but Flame was a magical creature and not just a regular lizard as most reptile familiars were. Our practical training involves a lot of spell casting, and the familiars increase our mana collection rate, so we need them there, Ella explained to Wolfe. Oh, I don't think we were properly introduced. Good to meet you. I'm Reiko Morgan, the youngest daughter of Coven leader Morgan. Stick with me, and I will be able to teach you lots of random tips and tricks. Waiting on the scheduled classwork to catch up with your progress would just be a waste of our first year. Cassie perked up at the promise of spell training. Most of their classmates really were too far behind her in power at this point since she tested between 3 and 5 times stronger in the aura exams than the rest of Class A, and many were almost as far behind in knowledge. So it would help ensure that she achieved her goal of crushing them all in the exams and making her grandmother proud. I look forward to your assistance, Cassie answered with a bow that made her brush against Wolfe. The spark was there again, despite the fact that Wolfe had the protective skill active to hide himself and no mana in his system. He would have to be extra careful about touching random people until he knew what the limits of his ability were. Or perhaps this time, it was from Cassie, who now had an active aura and might not be used to controlling her power yet. Either way, it was rather pleasant. We should do a movie night after this. Group bonding activity, and we can talk about the things that shouldn't be said in public. Reiko suggested, making Risa smirk at her. So you're thinking of things that shouldn't be spoken about in public already, are you? Watch out, Wolfe. You're going to end up some Coven Council witch's pet, watching a house full of little witchlings as she attends council meetings. The fourth-year witch joked while Ella and Cassie gave her a dirty look for the joke about someone stealing their familiar. What Reiko actually meant was that she wanted to talk about her plans for this year and what she would do next year, assuming she passed her classes. Graduation and nobility weren't guaranteed things, even for Class A in the second year, as the nobility standard changed constantly based on the relative power level of the existing nobles. In a strong generation like the one Elder Maria was from, even decently powerful witches could fail to make the cut or end up at the very bottom of the nobles' power structure. After seeing the way this generation of witches was shaping up against the standards at the academy, it might be much easier than expected to gain a title, Wolfe thought. The loser of the swimming race came back empty-handed, but nobody cared. They were all busy with the new familiars. How much stronger do I need to get to graduate the first year? Cassie asked Reiko while the new pairs celebrated. A lot of it is about the potion and spell knowledge, but if you can pass the exams and get an aura strength of 100, you can qualify as a commoner witch at the final exam, Reiko explained. Oh, that's easy then. I have a great memory for recipes, and I'm already over 100 aura strength. Cassie's revelation shocked Reiko, who had left the assembly early to answer a message from her mother. Anything over 30 when they entered the academy was usually enough for Class A, but having enough aura to pass the exams during the first week was just cheating. While everyone else in the first year struggled to slowly gather the mana to use the spells they were learning, she would be able to do them repeatedly until she had them right. What none of them realized yet was that the same applied to Ella, whose aura strength was skyrocketing after bonding with Wolfe, as their relative power levels naturally wanted to equalize. That settles it, then. Movie night tonight and a refresher class tomorrow to get Cassie and Ella up to speed on the first few weeks' materials. Reiko decided. Ella nodded her agreement and got to her feet. Now, into the pool. We have wasted enough time on the deck. What started as a swim turned into a free-for-all as soon as a ball was introduced, and, before they knew it, the announcement that dinner was about to be served was playing throughout the school. Everyone, change quickly if you want good seats, Risa announced, throwing a shirt over her head and sliding into shorts, still damp from the pool. A good seat? The cafeteria looked large enough for everyone. Wolfe asked. It is, but the inner tables are closely spaced. We smell like sweat and pool, and half the school reeks of overdone perfume and body sprays. The walls are the good tables. Risa explained before slipping her shoes on and running toward the cafeteria. Ladies, shall we? Wolfe asked, picking one up in each arm. Oh, this is the way to travel. Mary, you should ask the pup if you can get a ride. Ella laughed. Mary gave her familiar a pleading look as she threw a school uniform dress over her bikini. The so-called pup was easily 200 pounds of fluff and muscle, making it 3 times the tiny witch's size. It reluctantly agreed and let her on, but once the ride turned into a mobile hug as the first year's resident fluff lover settled in, Pup seemed to lose his hesitancy and happily trotted off after the crowd. Wolfe set the girls down at the entrance to the student locker room and moved to the staff room, where he left his clothes. Wolfe, save us a seat, would you? We will take longer than you to get changed. Ella called from next door as Wolfe stuffed his swim trunks in one of the provided mesh laundry bags everyone used to carry their gym gear. Not a problem. I will meet you up there. He called, then jogged out into the hallway. Only one corridor over, he met up with Mary, who had stopped so that Pup could meet another canine familiar. But when he caught up to some of the other girls, it turned into a foot race to the cafeteria. Dang, you're fast. Chasing down a familiar is no joke. The second-place finisher panted, passing Wolfe as he went to look for a table. A burning sensation started on his arm, and with it, the sensation of immense demand on his mana. Bonded partners request the use of Witch Magic Fast Travel. Do you accept? Y/N. Wolfe hadn't seen any sort of message like this from his inheritance before. Maybe it was part of the familiar link? He didn't recall the familiars getting a choice, though. But if it was going to be a regular thing, he would have to stop wearing long sleeves or at least keep his cuffs unbuttoned, or he would never know what the messages were supposed to be. He also didn't know any sort of traveling spell, much less a witch magic one, but if the inheritance was willing to help, or it was part of the familiar bond, he was more than happy to go along with it. I accept, bring them here. Wolfe thought. Wolfe rushed to fill his storage capacity as a huge amount of mana was pulled through him to the spot where a magical circle lit up around his feet, filling with smoke, and then suddenly, both Cassie and Ella were there in front of him. Tada. Seats found. Wolfe greeted them while the room went silent. What in the world was that? We were trying to summon you back to the locker room to see if the familiar bond was working. Ella asked. See, I thought you didn't want to walk all the way here, so I brought you here instead of me there. It's a good thing you were dressed. Wolfe admitted. Oh. Do you recall that girl in our year that had a pixie as a familiar? It was always doing things like that. Misinterpreting requests, playing pranks using poorly worded orders, making her underwear invisible. The cook asked her partner. You forget. I have a demonic imp as a familiar. It is almost as annoying. So, boy, what one are you? Demon, fae, or undead? The other, heavier set cook asked Wolfe. Why would you think I was one of those three? Wolfe asked. Well, that's about it for things that both look human and can be familiars, so you've pretty much got to be one of the three. She replied. I suppose I could tell you as a personal favor. Wolfe agreed, teasing the woman, who held her hands up in defeat. Never mind. If the answer is fae or demon, I don't want to owe you a favor, and if the answer is neither of those, I really don't want to owe you a favor. She laughed. A witch's word was said to be her bond, and they could easily capture a promise or favor in a spell to force compliance later. It was one of the first things Uncle Ivan warned Wolfe about when he was a little kid, watching what he promised them. Even a casual conversation with the authorities could be used to magically force compliance and make you turn on your people. Back up a bit. How did you even do that? Cassie asked. You tried to summon me. I thought it was better to bring you here, and then there was a summoning circle. Wolfe phrased it as a question. I heard that demons can use traveling magic fairly freely. Even some of the lesser imps can do it. Are you sure this isn't a duplicate of the real Wolfe? Someone asked. There is an easy way to test. Just ask him something from before the summoning, something only the real one would know. Another student suggested. Wolfe leaned in close to Cassie's ear and whispered. The first time we created an amulet, you passed out in my bed. The second time we made the one you're wearing around your neck. That made her blush bright red, and she began to nod rapidly. Yes, this is the real Wolfe, or at least he has all the memories. Ella was smirking at Cassie's blush, but Wolfe wasn't about to out anyone's secrets, so he just led the two to an open table and went to get the food. The cafeteria worker handed him a tray with 4 orders of the special on it, as well as a small dish of raw meat, and made a gesture toward where Reiko had just made it to the cafeteria. What happened? You were summoning Wolfe and then you vanished. She panted. He thought we wanted to come here. Apparently, there is a choice when you get a humanoid familiar. Ella informed her with an upset look. Don't be mad. Let me know what you want in advance, and I am sure things will work out better next time, Wolfe told her, setting out the plates and passing the raw meat to Flame, Reiko's reptilian familiar. The small, red, armored lizard gave him a distinct thumbs up before digging in, which made Wolfe laugh. The creature was more intelligent than he had given it credit for. I wonder what went wrong? It's supposed to go by your will, not his random guess. He couldn't be strong enough to overpower the bond, could he? Reiko asked, tapping her fingers on Flame's head as she was deep in thought. I thought you couldn't break the bond? Wolfe asked. A familiar can't. Once they have accepted, it's for life. But if they are particularly strong, they can resist parts of it, or in an extreme case where they are immensely more powerful than the witch who summoned them, they can even attempt to reverse the dynamic at the moment that they're summoned. That's what demons are famous for. Risa explained from across the aisle. Tempting. Do you think I could ask them to keep wearing the schoolgirl outfit even if I did that? Wolfe asked, making Risa choke and splutter on her mouthful of soup and earning him a smack on the back of the head from Ella, who was closest. Probably. Witches who lose to their demonic familiar usually suffer very bad ends, though. They're usually either killed or dragged to the demon realm. It might be a waste to reverse the contract only to have them do things they were already doing for you. A senior class student pointed out. After dinner, everyone went to shower away the scent of the pool. The school didn't use an overdose of chlorine as the ones in the city did, but it still had a mild chemical smell that the sensitive noses in the academy could detect. Wolfe had just gotten out of the shower and grabbed his clothes when he got another message from his inheritance. Bonded partner requests your presence. Activate fast travel, Y/N. 3 seconds remaining. Wolfe had been waiting for this chance. He pulled just his uniform pants on and grabbed his shirt. Travel to partner. The world seemed to blur, and Wolfe found himself standing in a large dorm room. 2 beds sat on opposite walls, and a couch sat in the middle of the room, facing a magical fireplace with a television above it. Nice place you've got here. Wolfe greeted them while he admired the immaculately clean dorm room and the sight of 2 witches kneeling in front of him in their pajamas. They must have just finished drawing the magical circle on the floor, the one Wolfe was standing on. Sorry about that. I'm not sure if it's possible to aim my arrival. Wolfe apologized. No, you arrived just where we wanted. We thought the problem might be that we didn't have practice, so we used a physical circle this time, and it worked much better. Cassie explained. Yes, this time, I got a notice that you requested my presence. It's a good thing I had a few seconds to respond. I had just gotten out of the shower. Wolfe stepped out of the circle carefully, and Ella placed the rug back over it before moving to sit on the large couch facing the television. Cassie picked the spot at the end, so Wolfe moved the ottoman in front of them and sat down in between. Close contact helps build your aura, right? This is the best way to do that, he explained and then pulled the witches close to his side. We have half an hour before Reiko arrives for the movie night, and she's bringing the popcorn. Why don't we build our bond a little first? Ella suggested, drawing a hint of mana through Wolfe and incorporating it into her aura. The witch's aura didn't actually hold mana, it was more like a solar panel for mana, and this exercise increased both the size and efficiency. But it took mana to do, and if they tried to draw mana through their aura, they couldn't enhance it at the same time. So, they needed either a familiar or a magical item to help them with the process. They had company coming, so Wolfe placed his arms around their shoulders and let them practice while he relaxed. He had almost dozed off due to the comfortable warmth when there was a knock at the door, and Ella hopped up to get it, her short, light blue hair now fully dry. Reiko and Mary? That's unexpected. Please come in. Ella greeted them. We're roommates. I hope you don't mind the extra presents. The rest of my study group wanted to stay in alone with their familiars. Mary explained. The pup was right behind them, with Flame sitting on his head, eagerly waiting to get into the room. As soon as the girls cleared the door, the fluffy white dog rushed past everyone and lay on the floor in front of the fireplace, giving it an expectant look. Subtle, isn't he? Cassie laughed, grabbing the remote to turn the electric fireplace on. Cool, his tattoo matches your amulet. Mary noticed, poking Wolfe on the arm where the Noxus family crest was clearly visible, but otherwise ignoring his shirtless attire. Wolfe looked down at the family mark, made as a child after he was adopted, to ensure his status as a member of the Noxus family while he fought to earn a better place in life. It had changed from what he recalled now that he looked more closely. The errors in the runes had adjusted, and the damage from years of growth was repaired. If it weren't time-faded, he would think it was brand new again. We're very distantly related, but have the same family name after all. Wolfe agreed. How distantly? The tiny witch asked suggestively. I think the last time our families interconnected was 11 generations ago, Cassie told her with a smile, still resting a hand on Wolfe's chest to work on her aura. That only made Mary's smile even larger. She was about to speak again when Reiko hugged her from behind, the larger woman's prodigious chest nearly swallowing the smaller witch's head. Go and sit. The snacks are ready. We will talk magic after the first movie, Reiko instructed, much to Mary's annoyance. She wasn't a patient person, and she had good questions circling around her brain right now. The film she picked was a tragic romance, and by the end, there were 4 sobbing witches on the couch. Reiko did her best to hide her emotional state, while Wolfe tried his best to console Cassie and Ella without mentioning the ending of the movie and upsetting them even more. It was Pup who had the best luck at that, as he simply flopped himself across Reiko and began to lick Mary's face clean until she laughed. That might not have been the best choice of movie. How about we start on the essential spells? Reiko here practiced a lot before coming to the academy since she missed last year's entry by only a few weeks. Mary suggested. This was the true purpose of the study groups, not to watch movies and bond, but to improve their knowledge. They usually broke up due to conflicting egos, but if they lasted and actually studied, the witches in them usually ended up much better off than their less dedicated peers. Let's start with the basics then. My mother said every witch needs a storage talisman. She wouldn't send me here with anything. She says it builds character, but I have the circle. Reiko began. I made one myself to give to my grandmother as a gift before I left. They're pretty easy once you know the trick to them. Carve the circle so your paint doesn't run and place your choice of reagent on top. You can choose the correct one to use by which one reacts the best when you draw in mana while holding it, Cassie explained. Or if you don't have high-quality reagents like we don't tonight, you draw a bit of blood and use as much mana as you can from your familiar to substitute for the reagent while creating the amulet. For mana collection spells, they are usually the best reagent anyhow. Reiko agreed. That sounded like exactly what Wolfe had done with Cassie, though the familiar spell hadn't connected them at the time. Ella was giving Wolfe an apprehensive look, but she nodded her agreement and went to grab her school supplies while the others took the opportunity to draw a bit of blood from their familiar and mix it with a paint marker. Wolfe was shocked that neither complained much, even though the small tube had to be a fair bit of blood for a small lizard such as Flame. My family heirloom is a storage device, so I will sit this one out since I know the spell, Cassie explained, then handed Ella a pre-mixed paint marker and leaned against Wolfe while the others worked. Their wooden discs, provided by the school, were much higher quality than the ones Cassie and Wolfe had used, durable enough that they wouldn't need to be protected with resin. Wolfe went along with them and carved another, knowing that someone was likely going to make a mistake the first time. Ella's handwriting was surprisingly good, Mary's was a bit flowery but passable, and the only failure was Reiko, who placed one of the runes out of order. Here, use this one. It's better than waiting to do it again, Wolfe suggested. The moment he placed it in front of her, Flame licked it clean and then let loose a small burst of fire and lightly singed it dry. No other familiar's fingers on your witch's talisman? That's understandable, Wolfe told the lizard, who seemed very excited to have its intentions understood. Pup didn't even bother to get up, still resting his head against Mary while she filled the runes on her talisman with the mixed paint. Oh, this is so much better than doing them by calligraphy. Plus, they will last longer since the runes won't rub off. Excellent idea, Cassie. Reiko commended her as she finished the talisman. Now, do we just have them nearby, or do we need them to touch the talisman? Ella asked. For a familiar, have them touch you. The more skin contact, the better because it increases the rate of mana transfer and will make the process faster, so you don't exhaust yourself. Reiko explained, looking at Wolfe and smiling. Ella was wearing the school-issued long silk pajamas, which might be an issue, but Mary chose a nightgown, so her legs and arms were bare as she wrapped herself around Pup. We're all friends here. No need to be shy. Or I can just put my arms around your waist, Wolfe suggested. That was what he did with Cassie, and it worked excellently, but he couldn't say that around strangers. I have a better idea. Wolfe, close your eyes, Cassie suggested. Wolfe wasn't sure where this was going, but he had high hopes. Especially after he felt a piece of cloth being tied around his head as a blindfold. Someone pushed his pant legs up, and then there was a round of quiet giggles before soft flesh landed against his chest and bare legs rested against his. Wolfe wrapped his arms around Ella's bare waist and felt her wiggle a little, getting comfortable. So I just hold the talisman and draw as much mana as I can throw him into it? Ella asked. That's right. Wolfe, if it helps, you can push a bit of mana as well if you have the ability. I know Flame does. Reiko explained. Not a problem. I can do that a little bit. He drew as much as he could into his mana pouch before they started. It wasn't even close to full, but it should be close to what he had available for the second talisman with Cassie, the one she wears as a family heirloom. All right, here we go, Ella muttered, and Wolfe felt the pull as she began to draw mana as fast as she could. Wolfe added his own stored mana smoothly over the course of a second, completing the spell with a surge as he let the talisman drain the last of his capacity, and Ella gave a silent shudder in his arms before going limp against him. She was still holding herself upright though, so she wasn't unconscious, but Wolfe deeply regretted being blindfolded right now. Oh, that looked intense. Wolfe must have a pretty good compatibility and mana flow rate. Mary cheered, making Wolfe smile. 97% compatible with both of them. That's why the headmistress didn't strip either of them of their familiar bond. Wolfe explained. Wow, that's crazy compatible. I think I'll only be in the mid-80s with Pup, and that's still really high. Mary sighed. Now, draw mana from your familiar and fill the talisman you just created. It will let you cast a few spells instantly with stored mana, which will be really useful if you actually have to use the shield spell we're learning next. Reiko explained. This one didn't have to be a talisman. They could just memorize the incantation and visualization to activate it. It was part of their innate magic, and eventually, they would be able to do it with just a thought, so Wolfe assumed that he would get a chance to watch and learn, but that wasn't his fate. We need to keep drawing from our familiars until we have it right, and contact helps, so I'm sorry, but Wolfe, you will remain blindfolded, Ella explained. Understandable. With a human familiar, you will need time to get truly comfortable around them. Wolfe agreed. Going against his resistance, Ella moved out of his lap to lean against his left side, and a second body leaned against his right. That must be Cassie. While they worked on the shield spell, Wolfe focused on the sensation, but then realized he, too, could be working on something magical. Fire magic was the only Magi circle he knew, but a bit of warmth wouldn't hurt anything. He focused on the spell circle, then on releasing heat into the area around him. It was slow going at first, and it was hard to maintain his focus with the two witches' bodies pressed up against him, but eventually, Wolfe managed to maintain a steady warmth in the room. It required very little power, only a few % of what he could continually draw, but the effect was exactly what he hoped, bringing the temperature in the room from a cool 20 degrees up to around 28, where it was more comfortable for everyone to have next to no clothes on. By the time Wolfe had mastered the technique, it was getting late, and the girls were packing up their school bags while making plans to meet before class. Reiko and Mary left as soon as their supplies were packed, and Ella got up to put her pajamas back on, so Wolfe was going to get up as well, but Cassie shifted to face him, pressing her chest against his arm. I don't mind if you stay the night. Being close to your familiar, even while sleeping, helps the aura, she whispered. I would love to, but I should change, Wolfe suggested, pointing to the fact he still had nothing but pants and a blindfold on. Just lose the pants. Cassie decided, then tugged them down and realized Wolfe hadn't had time to put boxers on. As I said, I should probably change. He laughed, imagining the look on her face. No, just go lead him to the bed, Cassie. We have a lot to talk about tonight. Ella said softly, and Wolfe felt a hand guiding him. Once at the bed, he was arranged on his back in the middle and with a body on either side. Then a blanket was pulled over them, and his blindfold was finally removed. There, that's better, Cassie said softly, cuddling up against him as Wolfe wrapped her in his arm and pulled her close. Ella leaned over the top of Wolfe to face Cassie and began to whisper in an apologetic tone. What I wanted to tell you is that I might have snuck a head start while you were sleeping last night. But what I learned was amazing. His, fluids contain mana, and you can work with them for an hour afterward to either cast spells or build your aura. You did what? All the way on the first night? Ella, I knew you liked him, but isn't that a bit fast? Cassie whispered back. No, not all the way, just with my mouth. The mana burns when it reaches your stomach, but in a good way, and you can use it to build your aura. Ella explained quickly, emphasizing the point about it being good for the growth of her aura. Really? I never considered that. But you promised no head starts, so you had better not do anything tonight. Just meditate and build your aura. Cassie replied. The two shook hands on their deal, and Wolfe pulled them both partially on top of him before beginning to drift off to sleep, vaguely amused by the fact that they were making such deals as if he weren't here to have a say in them. Wolfe woke up incredibly warm but entirely unwilling to move. On his left was the short blue hair of Ella, above her slender and toned body, with just a hint of womanly curve hidden under her Academy-issued pajamas. On his right was the long brown hair of Cassie, who had his thigh in a leg lock, using him as a body pillow. He could hear the fan going, but none of that blessed breeze was reaching him, despite the blanket being long since discarded and only a light sheet remaining. The clock read 6:55, so Wolfe knew he only had a few minutes left to enjoy the situation before the alarm went off. From what he could see, the evening's events had done them a lot of good. Both of their auras were notably stronger and more stable this morning. Wolfe didn't know if that was normal during the early days after getting a familiar, but he had heard that the right one made a huge difference to a witch's growth. He also felt stronger this morning, though, which surprised him. If they were so much weaker than he was, causing him to be constantly building their aura in a natural effort to balance them with his level, and his presence made a big difference in their progress, wouldn't he logically only get a little feedback? The inheritance should have his answer if he could figure out how to get it to tell him. Inheritance display. Show gains? Status? Rewards? Interface. None of them was changing the symbol in any way, so Wolfe searched the inscription itself for any details that he could find among the runes and writing. Magi bloodline, 3%. Lightning affinity, low. Fire affinity, low. Gravity affinity, low. Other elements locked. Bonded witch, Ella Mariel. Bonded witch, Cassie Noxus. Bond ability, fast travel. All of the percentages and levels were a guess on his part, going by the amount of the rune that was filled in instead of hollow, but it was more information than he had even a few minutes ago. The inheritance spell was simply too complex, being made up of countless layers of magical writing, so only the bits on the surface were legible. He probably couldn't even use a microscope to look at it more clearly, since it only showed up to his own eyes, and it was well known that you couldn't take a picture of a spell inscription activating in the air. It wouldn't show up in the film or even in a mirror. Wolfe felt that he had made a fairly large jump in his mana level over the last day, and his ability to use mana had improved a little. The bloodline's actual effects were a bit vague, since he was only piecing together the parts of the tiny magical writing that he could read among the multiple layers of magical text, but he was more interested in the unlocking other elements part. For example, wind would be great to help disperse some of this body heat. But according to the writing of the inheritance, he had gravity control. If he could make it work, he could push the oscillator button on the fan and make it turn to cool him down as well. Simply focusing his will made the fan shake, but the button simply wouldn't budge. The fan housing was moving, so his spell was working somewhat, but the button wouldn't move. I have got to pull it up, not push it down, Wolfe mentally sighed, realizing his mistake. The whole fan wobbled at first, but then the button pulled up, and the fan started turning just as the alarm went off. Good morning, Ella mumbled. Good morning, Wolfe replied, and she sat straight up in bed. Sorry, for a second, I forgot where I was. I'm going to shower. You wake Cassie up. Ella apologized, running for the shower. Are you up? If you don't get up, I'll have to kiss you awake. Wolfe teased Cassie, who forcefully scrunched her eyes closed. Wolfe turned to cradle her head, placing a gentle kiss on her lips. She was still pretending to be asleep, even when he kissed the tip of her nose, making her sneeze. But their fun was interrupted by Ella coming back out of the bathroom. "Will you two stop making out? It's time for breakfast. If you don't hurry, there won't be time to shower," Ella reminded them, stepping out of the bathroom in a towel. "Fine, I will go shower and meet you back here in 10 minutes, Wolfe complained while the blue-haired witch stuck out her tongue at him. He got back just in time to help Cassie braid her hair and to help Ella find her tights. She had left them in a bag under her own bed after picking them up at the supply room. Today Wolfe realized why the cafeteria was so large. From the second year on, they had practical training for the first half of the day, which meant bringing familiars to class. Some didn't bother or didn't have to, but most of them needed their familiar nearby for the training, which only got more difficult every semester. That meant a whole room full of witches and small animals, with a few oversized or non-furry outliers, like Flame and Wolfe. The first years were going to potion class, so only a few had brought helpers. "You, familiar guy, tell this creature to behave," Krista Abilene demanded, dragging a goblin with her by its long green ear. "Dude, what's your problem?" Wolfe asked the clearly battered and frustrated goblin, who made a lewd hip thrust in response and looked at his summoner. Wolfe leaned forward to whisper in the goblin's ear. "Humans are different. You need to blend in, behave like them, dress nicely, and stay clean. Then once she forgets you're a goblin in a few years, you make your move, and you can keep her pregnant and happy forever." The goblin cheered, then gave Wolfe a fist bump and ran to the sink to wash, causing shouts of outrage from the kitchen workers who were trying to do dishes in it. With that done and bubbles of dish soap still dripping from his body, he grabbed a tablecloth from an unoccupied table and fashioned it into a new toga that dragged far behind him on the floor, then returned to stand politely beside his witch. "Do you speak goblin or something? That was amazing. How long will it last?" Krista asked. "As long as it needs to. Just treat him well and keep civilizing him. You'll have the best-behaved familiar in the class in no time," Wolfe assured her. The snobby blonde went back to her friend group with a much better-behaved goblin while Wolfe tried not to laugh. They were both idiots, and he wondered which one would win the battle of wits. "Her parents are senior government ministers. I hope you didn't do anything that will cause trouble," Risa whispered to him. "Not at all. I told him if he was well-behaved and helpful until she graduated, he stood a chance at getting what every goblin wants," Wolfe whispered back. "You're evil," Risa mouthed silently, joining her friends for breakfast. Not many first-year students brought their familiars to potions class, and Wolfe wondered why Krista would if she was having issues with hers. Unless maybe it wasn't safe for her to leave the goblin unattended. "So, are you ready to be our personal porter for the morning?" "Familiars are usually only brought to potions to fetch and carry," Ella joked. "It's my handsome face, isn't it? You just can't stand to be away from me for even a little while," Wolfe joked back. "You just wait. Beautification potions are among our first lessons since every witch wants one. We will have you back to stunning and handsome in no time. Maybe that's the missing 3% compatibility. You never know." Cassie cut in, making the room laugh. The next thought through Wolfe's mind was that if beauty potions were one of the first things they learned, how ugly was Cassie's sister Melody before she left. After eating, all of the first-year students headed for the basement for their lab work. Professor Ashcroft was waiting for Class A at the door to her lab, giving Wolfe a look of pity. "I didn't expect to see you again in this sort of situation, at least not before a proper and thorough investigation was completed." "Oh, no need to pity me. I've got it pretty good," Wolfe laughed, confusing the teacher. "I have seen so-called Magi familiars before, and drawing mana through the men accused of being able to use magic is excruciatingly painful. For them, that is. That's why the Coven uses it as a punishment. Even with good compatibility, the process usually drives them to suicide within a few years," she whispered, so the young witches didn't hear. There was no reason to lie to a teacher that already knew so much about him. He wasn't going anywhere anytime soon, and the headmistress had tacitly approved of him as a familiar already. Wolfe shook his head. "Maybe if they forcefully exceeded what I could supply and my storage was dry. But normally, it's not a big deal. They don't take more than I can give." Professor Ashcroft gave a thoughtful look. Interesting. So perhaps the Magi really were just weak demons who mixed with humans so they could live in this world without being banished. But we can talk about ancient history and evolutionary theory later. The lower classes need a strong familiar to help them activate potions. We wanted to send Mary and Pup, but he bit the first person to suggest it. Wolfe looked to Ella and Cassie for an answer. Maybe they knew a way for him to avoid working. So he's going to forcefully channel mana through the regular class witches? Ella asked, sharing a knowing look with Cassie. We found out the hard way. They should too. Cassie agreed. It is settled then. Wolfe, go help the other class, but you are forbidden to put more than one finger on them. Ella demanded. And sanitize your hands after, Cassie added, making Professor Ashcroft laugh. New witches and familiars are always so protective. Now off you go. The professor instructed him, unaware that the witches were trying to set the other students up for a prank of sorts. The other class was right next door, so Wolfe walked right in and waved to the teacher before taking the assistant teacher's spot. And who are you? The teacher asked suspiciously. Wolfe. Your volunteer familiar from Class A sent by Professor Ashcroft. Don't worry. I've been instructed not to put any more than a single finger on your students to help them activate their potions. A humanoid familiar? All right. Come here, and I will show them the process to make the basic healing potion, good for the common cold, simple cuts, bruises, and other basic ailments. It was easier than making soup. Add ingredients in a specific quantity and order to a boiling cauldron, and stir while doing an aura thing that Wolfe couldn't follow. You didn't even need to worry about the taste. Then you add mana until it changes color. Wolfe, can you push mana for the ones who can't access it on their own? If so, not too little or too much. It will ruin the effect. The teacher directed him. She pulled the tiniest amount from Wolfe, and he looked at her in shock. That's as much as it takes? Yes, every time. Can you do that 100 times today, or should I look for a second familiar? Wolfe shook his head. That little won't be an issue. I was expecting it to be closer to creating a mana talisman. Reiko taught a few of the witches last night, and Ella made one with my assistance. Class A really is on a different level. I don't even think we learned those this year, and they're making them before the first week of class. One of the students complained. Work hard, and you can do it too. Building your aura just takes practice and hard work. Wolfe tried to console her. I can't even use mana. How could I work on my aura in time? The witch asked. Ask your teacher this afternoon if you can make an aura wand. That helped Cassie's aura stabilize. Wolfe suggested. Mr. Familiar, that is not first-year magic. Please don't give the students crazy ideas. The teacher admonished him. But it was so easy. Just how bad had these witches gotten? As a child, he used to idolize them on television as symbols of beauty and power, and this teacher was ruining his mental image. The uniforms were everything he had hoped for, but the actual witches were a bit of a letdown. Wolfe sat silently while the potions brewed, wondering how much else he had wrong about the world because he believed the movies and news stations were realistic. All right, we will go one at a time. Wolfe, please make contact with the students so they can activate the spell. Wolfe walked straight to the girl who said she couldn't use mana and gently placed a finger on the back of her neck. Can you draw mana when I touch you? Or should I push some into you so you can activate the potion? She focused, then shook her head. Push, please. The trickle of mana was just enough for her to feel warm and fuzzy all over, with an intangible ache that yearned for more, as was normal to Wolfe when he was working with witches. The brew turned light green and glowed a bit as she worked, then seemed to settle to a deeper herbal green. The healing potion was complete, but this witch wasn't. She was missing something that the other two he had worked with weren't. Wolfe thought about what it might be as he went to the next witch in line and repeated the process. That one was the same as well, missing something. The third drew the thread of mana on her own, and Wolfe could feel the difference. Whatever internal mechanism let witches use mana was either missing or underdeveloped in the first two witches. The potion brewed perfectly, and the student beamed in pride as the first in the class to do so under her own power. Wolfe rewarded her with a little extra push of mana to give her aura something to work with, and felt the faintest hint of it begin to form as her knees buckled and dropped her into her chair. This class was beginning to be a lot of fun. They might have known all their lives that they were likely to become witches, but like him, they were still childlike in their magical abilities, and watching their joy at a first success made Wolfe understand why intelligent familiars were known to tease their witches. How could they not want to tease them? The more of the class that he went through, the more he enjoyed this assignment, even if it did mean that he had to work all morning instead of just lazing about. After making his way through the whole 100 witches of this potions class, he had a newfound understanding of the many reasons that teenage witches were so widely adored. Thank you, Wolfe. That will be all. You can go back to your witch while this class works on their herbalism. The teacher ordered him, pointing to the door when everyone had a potion in front of them. Some had managed to mess up the simple instructions, and the brew didn't work correctly, but it was still a potion of sorts. Their afternoon classes were practical spell skills. Everyone brought their familiars to this class, and the location changed based on the spell being taught. Today was a defensive spells day, so they were arranged in rows inside large protective circles made of metal and set out all over the classroom. For today, the location of choice was an enclosed field with a grass floor and a large number of small red flowers. Each student was given a 3-meter diameter space for everyone's safety, where they could sit and wait with their familiar while the teacher went over the spell circle. This one was one called Flame Armor, the most simple of multi-purpose defensive spells, according to the teacher. The one the girls had been practicing last night was something more in tune with their innate magic, but this elemental spell was something Wolfe could use. In order to create the armor spell with their innate magic, they needed a strong, stable aura and a good grasp on their abilities, which most of these witches didn't have yet. The flame armor could be activated from an inscription circle with only the most rudimentary of knowledge and a fire element reagent, in this case, the simple red flower that grew all over the classroom floor. They didn't even need to pick them, just sit between them. That combination was much easier for them to learn in their first class. The circle seemed to resonate with him, and before the teacher had finished explaining all the runes and their meaning, Wolfe was certain that he could cast this spell. Bless the witches for stealing so much of their modern magic from the Magi, he thought to himself as the inheritance notified him of success with a glowing string of runes on his arm. First spell visualization successful. Wolfe was sitting in between his two witches, so he reached both arms out to take their hands while they tried to visualize the spell to cast it without a talisman. The moment they touched him, the spell flashed to life around all three of them, and the girls gasped in shock. That's it. I get it now. Cassie mumbled happily. Did you see the visualization when you touched my hand? Wolfe whispered back, and they both nodded. That was going to be incredibly useful. Not only was he learning spells, but he would also be able to teach them to a pair of combat-capable witches with just a touch. Ones who were rapidly growing stronger while in contact with him. Now he just needed to convince the professor to teach him more. She said they were going to be working on this spell all week because it was important, but all three of them had it working somewhat correctly in the first 15 minutes. Wolfe fed a bit of mana to both Ella and Cassie, making the spell grow thicker until they could barely see through the orange glow. If they could have seen, they would have realized that the entire class was staring at them in shock at this accomplishment. Both witches dropped the spell and looked around, satisfied with their performance for the class, but it was Flame, the small fire element lizard, who caught Wolfe's attention. It seemed to be pleading for assistance from a cushion on the floor while Reiko kept nudging it back onto the cushion and out of the way while she practiced. Reiko, pick up Flame and let him push a bit of mana into you. He knows the spell, and he can show you. Wolfe called over to her. She looked skeptical, but as soon as she touched Flame, a faint orange glow surrounded her, and she gasped in shock. Elemental familiars will shape your future. They help your understanding and build your strength. Familiar Wolfe might have sped up the process, but eventually, Miss Reiko would have learned to trust and rely on her familiar. The teacher explained from the far side of the room, where she was busy helping a witch in the second row of students. Tell me, what made you call out to her? The teacher's next question caught Wolfe off guard. He had been engrossed in transferring mana back and forth with Cassie and Ella and had forgotten she was still here. He was giving me the most sad-looking pleading face. I couldn't let Flame suffer that frustration. Wolfe shrugged. The fierce armored salamander was giving you a pitiful look? She asked in disbelief. He's not really fierce, he's cuddly and adorable, but he only likes when Reiko touches him. He's very territorial. Wolfe explained, and there was no mistaking the fact that Flame nodded in agreement. Interesting. Is that the skill you got from the familiar bond? Communicating with animals? The teacher asked. No, this is just common sense. Flame is very smart, maybe even smarter than Pup. If you pay close attention and don't look at him as a pet or baby, he knows a lot of things. Wolfe replied with a smile. Flame made a happy puff of fire while Pup lightly growled at Wolfe before flopping back down on the floor next to Mary. The teacher looked a bit disturbed but began a new lecture anyhow. As you see, you can trust your familiar to help you. They're essential parts of your growth journey, so treat them well and keep them happy. Now, who had questions about the spell circle? Don't worry. I'll treat you well and keep you happy. Wolfe whispered to Cassie and Ella, who both flipped him off in return, then activated the flame armor without touching his hands, showing that they already understood it on their own and could use it without drawing mana from him or their talismans. You too, stay back after class with your familiar. We have something to talk about. The rest of you are dismissed. The teacher announced after 3 more grueling hours of watching the other witches try to master the spell. Even playing rock, paper, scissors with Flame had gotten boring by the end of class. It was just too slow-paced. It seems that your familiar is easily bored, but do try to keep it from disrupting the class. The teacher admonished them as soon as the other students were gone. Yes, Professor. The witches answered in unison. Good. We will be working on this vital defensive skill all week, so perhaps get him a book or something to keep him occupied. You may go now. They all left the class, and once they were safely out of earshot, Wolfe began to laugh. Get him a book or something. Wolfe mimicked the teacher's haughty tone with heavy sarcasm. Give me a spell book, and you wouldn't have to waste an entire week on one single spell. Seriously, even Flame can teach fire magic faster than that, and he can't speak or read. Wolfe laughed, making them both turn to him in shock. You understood the spell? Ella asked. I thought that part was obvious. I should be good with some other elements as well. Wolfe added, hopefully. We are so going to crush the elemental magic exams. Cassie giggled, gaining a little jump in her step. After they had dinner, Wolfe formulated a plan. The academy staff, as a rule, didn't ask unnecessary questions, so he was going to take advantage of that and get himself a spellbook to study during his free time. It might only be 2 days into the semester, but that would be long enough for senior students to need books, and he would just act as if he belonged. Or at least that was the plan before he got to the library. The place was enormous, with no markings or obvious sorting system. Who are you? I don't recall getting a new library worker. The witch at the counter asked suspiciously. Library worker? Not a bad idea. There are so many books. But sadly, I am registered here as a familiar, not a library worker. Wolfe informed her. I need proof. Reach out your hand. The librarian demanded, and Wolfe extended one gloved hand her way. She only cast some sort of spell on it and began to smile at him. Oh, it's you. Everyone on staff has heard about the 2 first years who summoned the same familiar. There is a big prize pool for the one who can confirm what species you are. I would love to have a copy of the first-year study guide and spell book plus something to read during class. A species? Wolfe asked, making the librarian laugh. No, it's not. I'm leaning toward Fae. Vanishing the teacher's assistant and stealing his appearance is totally a Fae prank. But the study guides are just enhanced textbooks and come with the spells included. We have the whole first year in one book here. She led Wolfe to a stack of simply bound hardcovers by the far corner of her desk, then looked him over and tried to decide what he would like to read. If it's demon, I can't help much unless you want to read fire magic. Unholy magic isn't commonly kept in public libraries. If it's Fae, we have a lot of nature magic, but almost nothing on gravity. Unless you can use lightning as well? Or I have got a secret stash of spicy romance books for witches of culture that you might enjoy as well. The librarian suggested. No, that would end very badly for Wolfe's reputation if anyone saw him reading spicy witch romance books in class. How about 2 copies of the study guide and then something diverse? Do you have an overview of utility spells and survival magic or something? I would like to know what powerful witches find useful in their day-to-day lives. Wolfe asked. You're feeling domestic? I have one, Home Enchanting for the Modern Duchess, that you might enjoy. It covers all sorts of things, and some are fairly easy to cast. They climbed up to the 2nd floor, then up a wide ladder, and the witch handed him the book. It was full of innate magic for a witch, though, so no use to him. I don't think I can do much with that right now since we live in a dorm and all, but I might ask for a copy later if I get bored. How about something adventurous? With useful spells and descriptions of travels through the Badlands and frozen wastes to the north. Wolfe asked. The librarian slid the ladder to the far side of the room using magic while she happily tapped her fingers on the ladder rung. Oh, we have just the thing. The Adventurer's Handbook. All of the witches who want to be wilderness guardians, hunters, and such will come here to get a copy. It's 1,000 pages, but only about 100 are spells. The rest is a really great story of the author's travels. The book was a treasure trove of useful things, and the author seemed to have lived an exciting life, so Wolfe carefully held the book and descended the ladder. This should keep us entertained for a while. I will start having my witches practice for the exams right away. Wolfe informed the librarian, making her giggle. They're going to have a hard time with a familiar so enthusiastic. Come back anytime you like. Wolfe waved goodbye and returned to the room with his lute carefully held to his chest. I brought goodies. Study guides for the exams. Wolfe called as he walked into the witch's dorm room. Reiko and Mary were already there, making notes about the visualization of the armor spell. Hey, Wolfe. I thought you had gone back to your room. Mary greeted him. Nope, library. They have all the good stuff, and they were happy to hand it out. You can even get a copy of the exam study guide with every spell you'll be tested on this year. He told her, and the tiny witch bounced to her feet, trying to grab the book from his hands. I only grabbed 2, sorry. But we can split them 1 per dorm until we get enough copies tomorrow, so set one between you and Reiko while Cassie and Ella get the other. Wolfe explained. And the huge codex in your hands? Reiko asked. Reading material for class, since it looks like the teacher won't let anyone work ahead, Wolfe explained. Reiko looked at the title, and her eyes got a happy shine to them. The librarian had said that this book was popular with witches who wanted to work outside the cities, and it seemed Reiko already knew about it. There are more copies in the library if you want one. Just ask the nice lady, and she will show you where they are, on the left side of the 2nd floor, up high. Wolfe explained. I'll go tomorrow, for tonight, we need to brainstorm this spell. If we compare notes, we should be able to get it nearly perfect. Reiko explained. That made sense, so Wolfe sat down between Ella and Cassie and pulled them both into his arms. Pup immediately got jealous and came to sleep with his head in Mary's lap instead of by the fireplace, dragging Flame with him by default since the lizard was sleeping on his back. What is it with you and familiars? It's like they all speak your language, only most of them can't speak at all. Mary asked, and Pup gave her a confused look. I honestly have no idea. I don't think Pup does, either. He's wondering why you don't understand him as well as I do. But he still likes you better. Wolfe shrugged. It must be the early effects of the spell. After a time, some witches can even see through their familiar's eyes and feel what they feel. Reiko explained. Well, that could be both fun and problematic. After 3 hours of practice, they had successfully proven Reiko's point about study groups being able to learn faster together than they could in class. Working together, they really could improve their understanding of a spell quickly, and the witches were making visible progress every few minutes with the guidance of Wolfe and Flame. The barrier field didn't have to be orange. It also didn't have to be a field around them. Depending on how they visualized and manifested it, flame armor could be anything from a haze of heat around them to an opaque blue or orange set of armor or clothing. The only constant was that it was actually made up of a solidified flame. The continual draw of mana from experimenting with the spell for hours had exhausted everyone, so they called it a night and made plans to meet for the cafeteria's first serving times for breakfast and take a detour before potions class to explore the library a little. Reiko and Mary went back to their room while Cassie and Ella got ready for bed, and Wolfe made very sure to set up and adjust the fan properly before everyone was comfortable this time. A small bit of preparation went a long way toward comfort. You might as well just bring all your stuff here. It saves the time to walk to your room, and it's not like you haven't seen everything already. Ella pointed out the next morning as Wolfe was about to leave to get clean clothes. I don't have much. I can bring it back here before we go to the library. Wolfe agreed. The library was open all night for students who got engrossed in their work or, more commonly, got into arguments with their roommates. Having one extra room open, even if it were a staff room, would also make the student council's job a bit easier with all of the conflicts that they were having among roommates. Wolfe couldn't see the president, but he could hear her dressing down a group of students a few halls over. She definitely wasn't having an easy or good morning. Don't tell me you got fired already. One of the janitors asked as she saw Wolfe leave his room with all his possessions stuffed in a laundry sack. Not at all. I'm still working as a teacher's assistant, but through some circumstances, I've officially become a familiar, so I'm switching rooms. He explained. Oh, I don't know if I should congratulate you or not. Did the Coven investigators finish already, or did you take a plea deal? Wolfe shook his head. Of all things, I was summoned during the first day's familiar summoning spell casting. Well, that saves time. If you haven't been informed already, the investigation team has just arrived here in the academy, and they are looking for you for a little chat, as they phrased it. They were concerned about where you went when they found your room empty, but you smell like witch and women's body lotion, so the mystery is solved. They have a dog with them, but your smell is so muddled and mixed with everything else in the academy that they would have had a hard time finding your current location around the school. The janitor explained. Across the dorm building, the investigator in question was currently explaining Wolfe's punishment for the crime of being born a Magi to Ella and Cassie. Our investigation has determined that he is actually a Class A threat, not an unfortunate mundane human. We just need to make sure he doesn't go wild and start killing people when his inhuman instincts take over, which they surely will when he grows in power. Since he is already bonded as your familiar, the death sentence has been commuted, but a threat at his level needs an additional safeguard put in place. Don't worry about it too much. You won't lose your familiar. It will only keep him under control. Just draw power from him until these devices are full and he is exhausted, then I will give him the mark of transformation and use the collected power to cast a curse on him so he can't hurt anyone. The thin woman told them with a shifty smile that told them she was lying, but that she knew they couldn't do anything about it. Defending a convicted fugitive was a severe crime, and they didn't have the backing to get out of the punishment for that crime if they did try to warn Wolfe before he could get back to the dorm room. Will it hurt him? Cassie asked. Only for a few minutes, then the spell will reveal his true nature. The transformation mark and the safety curse strip away the pretenses of humanity and leave such evil beings in hideous forms so that witches aren't confused by a pretty face and can see the true evil of their souls. Most violent criminals become imps, while molesters become goblins and the like. But after the spell is complete, he won't feel a thing. He will just be a proper and well-behaved familiar for you both. One that will be with you your whole life. The investigator explained. So, we torture him, brand him, turn him into an imp, and then the rest of his punishment is just to be our familiar? Ella asked, looking horrified, which the investigator easily ignored. In essence, yes, but there are no guarantees that he will be an imp. If his soul is truly reprehensible, might be a goblin or other form of lesser demon. Since he is only just awakened, he won't have the power to be anything more incredible. I am sorry. The woman explained impatiently. If the alternative is execution, I guess this is better. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I will if it keeps everyone else safe. Cassie slowly agreed, not seeing a way out of the situation, not for her and Ella, and certainly not for Wolfe. The investigators were very skilled and powerful senior Coven members. Even the most insane of citizens didn't question them or try to double-guess their decisions. They hadn't even managed to get an answer from the woman about what evidence or investigation went into her decision to convict Wolfe or how the punishment was determined. Good, now we wait for him to arrive. Calling him would use up the aura energy we will need to successfully complete the curse. Wolfe waved goodbye to the giggling janitor and returned to the room with his bag. Two large men stood outside his door with resting angry faces engaged, glaring at everyone who entered the hallway. Now, there's no need to stare down cute little girls like that. Unless it's your kink or something, Wolfe called out, walking up to the door. The Coven investigator isn't taking random visitors. One guard informed him, not losing the scowl. Want to tell her that Wolfe Noxus is here? I think she will make an exception. Wolfe answered, thinking that he could get the questioning part of the investigation over with so that he could take the girls to the library before they were late for class. Both guards pulled the blades at their waist and pointed them at Wolfe. Don't move, fugitive. Mistress, we have apprehended the suspected non-human. They shouted in unison. Wolfe resisted the urge to face Balm as the door opened, revealing an elderly witch with a gun in her hand. Finally, someone with common sense. If he really were that dangerous, two regular guys trying to stab him would just get them killed, and if he were on the run, they would have had to chase him down to stab him, and that simply wasn't happening for an average human. Get in here. I have been waiting. What are you carrying? She demanded. My belongings. I was in the process of moving in with my witches. Wolfe stated the obvious so that there were no misunderstandings. This woman was in a bad enough mood, and she got to serve as judge, jury, and executioner for captured Magi when they were caught in the city. She might get to do the same here, but Wolfe was hoping that the headmistress might get a say as well. Set them aside, and we will talk. She instructed, closing and locking the door behind him before moving to stand behind him as he placed his luggage on the floor under the bed. All right, ladies, as I instructed, pull everything you can at once. The investigator ordered before Cassie and Ella began to draw his mana storage empty. Once that first part of the ritual was done and the magical devices in their hands were glowing like light bulbs, Wolfe learned what Professor Ashcroft meant, that a cursed life as a familiar was a painful one that most would want to escape at the cost of their own life. With the enchanted objects, they could pull more than he could handle, and the excess demand was agonizing. Wolfe took a knee so he didn't fall over and focused on enhancing the speed he could pull mana in an effort to dull the pain. A thick black fog was forming around him, hiding him from sight, and he could feel a physical brand being pressed to his right forearm, just under the mark of the Noxus family, near his wrist. He wasn't sure when he passed out, but when he woke up, the fog was still clearing, the investigator was smiling, and both of his witches were crying. It didn't take a genius to realize that there would be no questioning and that his sentence had been passed down the moment that he walked into the room. Relax, ladies. See, I am fine again. Wolfe consoled them while trying not to glare at the investigator. Wolfe Noxus, as a verified class, a dangerous life form, you are hereby banished from the cities for eternity and sentenced to a life of service to any witch who can contain you with a summoning circle. Choose your true name now, evil being, and accept the judgment of the greater life forms. The woman intoned. What in the world was she on about? Beowulf Abraxas Asmodai Locarth Noxus, his whole name, as given by his mother and never fully recorded on any piece of paper, appeared in his mind, and the moment that he thought of it, a flash of red light filled the room. Bloodline gained demon. 1% complete. Element unlocked unholy. Wolfe was so engrossed by the notification by the inheritance inscription on his left arm that he didn't even notice the Inquisitor leave. I can't believe that she sentenced you to be transformed into a demon. Nobody has received an eternal sentence since the first intentional demons were made at the end of the war, an unknown voice gasped, and Wolfe saw a hooded figure step out from the corner of the room. Wolfe was barely listening as he looked at his system interface and the changes it had gained. His eyesight seemed much more clear, and the runes were easier to read, though Wolfe was sure he had never studied this language before. True name: Beowulf Abraxas Asmodai Locarth Noxus. Magi bloodline, 3-9%. Demon bloodline, 1%. Mana density, 10%. Mana focus 1/7, 6-19% complete. Lightning affinity, low. Fire affinity, low. Gravity affinity, low. Unholy affinity, medium. Other elements locked due to insufficient bloodline. Known spells. Flame Armor. Unholy Smite. Bonded Witch, Ella Mariel. Bonded Witch, Cassie Noxus. Wolfe briefly considered thanking the woman, considering the gift she had given him, but his first concern was Ella and Cassie. All of the additional data that he could read from the inheritance spell inscription could be examined later. Wolfe grabbed them both in a hug and channeled a little mana into them, knowing it should relax them at the very least. Now is not the time for that. How can you be so calm when they turned you into a... Why do you look the same? Cassie asked, wiping tears from her eyes. You in the corner. Care to explain what just happened? Wolfe asked. The headmistress stepped forward out of the shadows with a large smile on her face. You really are an oddball. When humans are hit with that spell, it is supposed to transform them into a type of demon appropriate to their power level, with an appearance that reflects the very worst aspects of their nature. That's how the majority of artificial demons were created and banished from this world by the witches to eliminate suspected survivors of the Magi clans and other criminal elements from society. The girls expected you to be turned into an imp or worse, but it looks like it didn't change your form. That is very intriguing indeed. How pure does your heart have to be to retain a human form? So you're saying I could be transformed into an imp at any moment? Wolfe asked. Use your new magic and see what happens. It's better to get it all out of the way at once. The pity was clear in her voice, but she had a point. Wolfe filled his mana pouch, which seemed to absorb mana much faster than before, despite holding much more, then focused on the new spell that he had gained when he was cursed, called Unholy Smite. He focused on activating the spell as far away from himself as possible, then felt his mana pool empty, but nothing seemed to happen. It used mana, but I should have focused on something in sight. I don't know if it worked. Wolfe shrugged. Try using it again on me. Headmistress Peach suggested, but screaming from outside caught their attention even through the thick dorm walls. The headmistress ran out of the room to the large window at the end of the hall, closely followed by Wolfe and dozens of students. A burned-out personnel carrier sat in the yard, with an irate and soot-covered investigator standing in front of it, glaring at the bright white flames which were still devouring the vehicle that she had arrived in. Teachers were rushing out, using counterspell magic and dousing her transport with water, which had no apparent effect on the flames. Wolfe, is that your magic? Headmistress Peach asked, giving Wolfe a murderous glare. I've never seen that spell effect in my life. You wouldn't have asked me to use it if the spell could be that dangerous, right? Wolfe countered, and the headmistress sighed. Just make it stop before someone dies. I can't? Smite isn't an ongoing thing. I don't think. Wolfe shrugged, not particularly concerned now that he had seen where his spell had hit. On further introspection, that was an incredibly idiotic thing to do. He could have seriously hurt or killed an innocent bystander, throwing magic around at random without knowing what it would do. Headmistress Peach cast a spell that created a huge circle around the burning vehicle and snuffed out the flames, then put her hands on Wolfe's shoulders and walked him back to the dorm room. For the record, I didn't expect that. Wolfe began, but the headmistress was shaking her head and quietly laughing to herself. You gained holy magic? That should keep them away from the academy for a while. Holy magic can only be used on evil beings or those with bad intentions. If she were impartial in her judgment, the spell wouldn't have done more than stung her, and it certainly wouldn't have burned out her vehicle and made her walk home. Wolfe didn't correct her clear mistake and let her believe that his magic was holy and not unholy. It was better to keep on everyone's good side at this point until he understood what this judgment meant for him in the grand scheme of things. On the other hand, Cassie and Ella were thoroughly confused by the recent events. Wolfe hadn't shown any signs of being able to use advanced magic yesterday, and even the curse that had been expected to turn him into an imp or a goblin hadn't worked as expected. Nothing that had happened since they got up this morning had gone as planned, and it had left them feeling disoriented. Demons all get unique gifts from the curse. It is an innate and unavoidable side effect of the magic and the reason that nobody in their right mind uses the eternal curses. The boon that the spell grants the targets can make them much more dangerous than they were to begin with. A witch's innate magic requires balance. In this case, the target is granted power in exchange for their freedom. Growing plants will deplete the soil and so on. The headmistress explained. I don't think that was enough explanation. They still look pretty lost, and so am I. Wolfe replied. The coven leader decided that you were too dangerous to be allowed to enter society again after your time here at the academy. So, she banished you from the coven-controlled fortress cities forever. The investigator decided that the best way to enforce that decree was to make you a demon, since they can't enter the city unless they are bound by a summoning spell. If they break the binding, they are immediately banished by the wards of the city. It is the perfect implementation of their will, but the most extreme option within the range of banishment options. Nobody really worried about what would happen to you afterward, since you are already a familiar and an eternally banished criminal by birth in the minds of the investigators. Headmistress Peach tried again. Will our families be in trouble? Cassie asked. Not as long as Wolfe stays gone. You and Ella could likely go back without issue, and they won't actively target your families inside the city, but for both of you and Wolfe, the smart move is to make a choice like Reiko intends to and pick somewhere far away to seek employment after graduation. The room fell silent as everyone digested the implications of her words and what they meant for the girls' future, even if they aced the exams and were proven to be the most powerful witches of their generation. I can get you a map and guidebook if you need them, the headmistress offered. Like the Adventurer's Handbook? I checked it out of the library yesterday because sitting in class doing nothing is boring. Wolfe told her, pointing to the book on the dresser. That's a good start, and it even has a map of the continent for you to look over. If you have more questions, ask Professor Ashcroft. She's always out in the wilderness gathering potion ingredients. But if anyone asks any of you about today, Wolfe was sentenced to be a familiar. You don't know what happened to the investigator's transport, and Wolfe certainly can't use destructive combat magic without permission from his witch. Understood. All three nodded their agreement, and the headmistress rushed out of the room to assist the investigator and the others in cleaning up the mess in the parking lot. I wonder what the teachers will think of you tomorrow. Some might have thought the summoning was a mistake, but now it's an official sentence. Cassie asked while hugging Wolfe and checking him for damages. Probably about the same as today. One already treated me as non-human, and Professor Ashcroft is pretty mellow about the whole thing, even if she did bring me here to be judged. Wolfe replied. We're late for the library, so we should probably head to breakfast and let everyone know the official version of what happened, Ella suggested, pulling them both along and out of the room, where the disturbing feeling of an incredibly powerful curse lingered in the air and was creeping her out. When Mary and Reiko arrived in the cafeteria with an armload of new books and an exhausted pup, who had been chasing the librarian around for an hour, trying to get the candies in her pocket that she kept for her own familiar, they were clearly not impressed with the trio who had skipped the trip. Deciding that an ounce of prevention was the best option, Wolfe apologized before they could begin an angry rant. First, before you say anything, the investigator from the city was here today to issue my sentence. It put us way behind schedule, sorry. Oh, well, they didn't kill you, so the professor was right about that. What did you get? The mana binding, so you couldn't work any magic? But that would make you a lousy familiar. Mary asked. Being a familiar is my sentence. Plus, being banished from all the Coven cities on pain of death. Wolfe shrugged. So, are you going to be heading for the woods right away then? Wait, you only said the cities. They didn't demand you leave the academy. Reiko asked. Nope, I can stay, so I've got until the end of the year at the very least to figure it out and make sure these fine young witches graduate, Wolfe told Reiko with a smile. As usual, Potions class took up the first-year witches' morning, but this time Wolfe had come prepared to have fun. He had a good book and lots of time to kill. But more importantly, he wanted to see what had happened to the students into whom he injected a bit of extra mana during yesterday's class. He could feel their aura starting to form before they had been dismissed for lunch, and he had high hopes for them. Greetings, Mr. Wolfe. It is good to see you again. The Class B through D Potions teacher greeted him politely when Professor Ashcroft sent him over to assist her for the morning. That was new. She had been pretty rude and dismissive last time. Good morning, Professor. It's a pleasure to see you again. What might your students be preparing today? Wolfe asked. Today's effort will be a bit more complicated than yesterday. We will be creating the beautifying potions, and then we will be practicing them along with the basic healing potions for the rest of the month until the capable students can reliably create them every time. The professor informed him. Risa wasn't joking about beauty potions being the basics. They were the second thing students learned. The professor sighed and then continued her lecture. Normally, we wait until next week to start this, but after the incident with the investigator, we decided to move it forward. Many students became concerned after seeing the state that her transport was in, and the threat of burn scars is a tragedy that every student wishes to avoid. The chance of burning yourself in this class is low, but never zero, so after some pleading, I have agreed to let them start on the beauty potions a few days early. Wolfe hid his smile and nodded in agreement. Tragic, really. Who would have thought that the Academy's new wards were so sensitive that evil intentions could trigger a smite? Wolfe's joke caused a wave of panic among the students. They surely wouldn't survive if something like that happened to them, which led to a recap of every bad thought they'd had so far in their young lives. The professor saw this as a golden learning opportunity, and Wolfe saw her place her hand on a drawn circle under her desk, shocking a small group of students. They immediately began to panic and pat themselves while the professor smirked at Wolfe, then silenced the room with a magically enhanced voice. Behave yourselves this term, and it shouldn't be a problem. You already knew that crimes are never successfully executed here, thanks to the wards, so a little shock shouldn't be too much of a warning. Wolfe knew that was a lie as well, or at least it was in Elder Maria's case. Unless the perpetrator had been caught and punished, but it didn't sound like it from what Wolfe had heard. Now, begin your potions. Remember, if you can successfully create more than the first one, you can keep them for only the cost of materials out of your student funding. That got everyone focused. Not a single student in class didn't want to keep as many of the beautification potions as possible. Wolfe could see hints of aura on a few students he had worked with yesterday and made a note to check their work first, so he could compare them to the ones who couldn't use mana and try to determine what the difference was. Mr. Wolfe, I'm ready for mana. The first of the students asked politely, calling him over to check her work. It looked all right, so Wolfe placed a finger on the back of her neck and granted her enough mana to work with. This time the potion needed much more energy than yesterday's healing potion, and the witch moaned softly as the mana flowed into her. Wolfe ignored that and focused on the way that his power moved through her body. There, in the chest, just above the solar plexus, was a cluster of nerves where the aura originated. That was the focal point all mana had to go through on a witch. For Wolfe, it only had to go through his mana pouch, and witches had a similar but less developed gland. At least these ones who were mostly born of mixed blood did, but after examination, it wasn't used to direct mana at all and appeared to be redundant. The potion turned to a lively lilac color with mild scents of tuberose and cherry blossoms. That should be a success, but the professor would have to verify it before the student could take it away. Excellent work. Wolfe congratulated her, then added a bit more mana as a gift to help her aura. Both Cassie and Ella had an aura hundreds of times stronger than this nascent witch, so Wolfe was fairly sure that it wouldn't hurt anything. One after another, the more talented witches completed their work, and Wolfe helped them all the same way, trying to kickstart their training. And maybe a little bit just because of the cute noises they made when he channeled mana into them. Eventually, he got to the first one that he knew couldn't use mana at all. Yesterday's analysis had been an abject failure as far as determining the reason for that, but Wolfe could make it a learning point today now that he had more information to work with. The cluster of nerves was still there in the same spot, but this one seemed dormant. The gland in the chest was less developed as well, but since the mana didn't move through it, Wolfe ignored it and tried to get the nerves to accept the flow of mana. He slowly moved mana through her system until he found the endpoint, where the pathway which transmitted energy from the outside to the nerves which controlled her aura was unresponsive. Pushing harder, the mana arced the gap and continued to flow, finding a path to the nerve cluster and then outward as the witch focused. It took her nearly 5 minutes to complete the process, but in the end, the potion activated. Good job. Have some mana. Wolfe congratulated her, patting her on the head as the witch blinked slowly and her body trembled. "What was that?" the professor asked curiously. "She had a damaged nerve, and the mana wouldn't move through her. So I worked around it, but it took a while." "No, I saw that. I meant that." The professor pointed to the witch's face, which was slack with her eyes rolled back and wore the happiest look he had ever seen on a human. "The process is mentally stressful. Don't worry. I had permission," Wolfe answered. From Cassie and Ella, who thought it would be funny, but permission is permission. "Can I go next?" A witch with bright orange hair that matched her eyes asked hopefully. Her potion was ready for mana, so Wolfe moved over to begin the process as the professor watched him like a hawk, intent on determining exactly what he had been up to. It was the same with this one. A damaged or undeveloped nerve wasn't able to transmit mana, so she couldn't complete the process without assistance. That served to make the rest of the system atrophy as well, and these last two clearly couldn't handle as much mana as the others who had developed more fully on their own. He forced through more mana than last time to bridge the gap and saw the two nerve points pull together as if he had welded them, bypassing the damaged portion in between. But the effect on his subject was greater as well, and she nearly passed out, whimpering his name. "You've had enough fun. If they can't do it, they can't do it. We have limited class time." The professor admonished Wolfe, then gestured for him to get a move on and have the others try to activate the potion on their own, with just passive mana flow from Wolfe. Or semi-active, with him providing mana directly to the endpoint since most couldn't properly pull mana from him on their own yet, and he wasn't going to let them suffer just because the teacher had caught him having a bit of fun at their classmates' expense. It was still just as effective to make the potions, but not nearly as fun as the other way, and it didn't have the long-term benefits. Wolfe walked back to the Class A lab once everyone had tried to complete their potion, only to be met with a round of giggles and blushing faces. "Goddess, please don't stop." Someone mimicked a high falsetto, making the class burst into laughter until Professor Ashcroft silenced them with a gesture. "Now, girls, don't tease the other class. Unlike you all, they don't have the capacity to handle mana easily, but they're doing their best," the professor informed them in a prim and proper voice. The professor's chastisement sent the witches went back to their work, but Wolfe still saw many envious looks being cast toward Ella and Cassie. "You remembered our orders, right?" Cassie asked with a hint of jealousy in her voice. One finger gently placed on the back of their neck to transfer mana. "No more, no less." Wolfe smiled back and rubbed her thigh, transferring her a bit of mana. Cassie huffed and went back to her herbology theory work, so Wolfe took out his book and opened it to the first spell. Spark creates a small flame, useful for lighting campfires, lanterns, and cigarettes. Not hot enough to replace a gas torch. That looked very useful, so Wolfe mentally traced it over and over in his mind until he was sure he had it right, and nothing felt out of place. Spell learned, Spark. The runic writing of the inheritance happily informed him when he had it perfect, and Wolfe silently thanked it for its assistance. He was going to move straight on to the next spell inscription, but the adventures in the book were extremely well written, and instead, he got caught up reading through them all the way to the next spell. Create water. Creates a steady stream of drinkable water. No matter how hard Wolfe tried, despite knowing he had the spell correct, it just didn't feel right and wouldn't activate. Water wasn't one of the elements he could use at the moment, and it seemed that the inheritance wasn't going to budge on that point. The next story led to a gravity-type spell called Gentle Steps. It allowed the user to step on snow or mud without sinking, a form of ground-level levitation that partially offset the user's weight but wouldn't actually hold them up in the air against gravity. That would be very useful outside, as the book suggested, to avoid the noise of ruffled leaves and broken branches, as well as traversing difficult terrain, but it would be much more fun here in the academy for sneaking up on people. Without the sound of footsteps, Wolfe was certain he could move through most of the school after lights out without being noticed. It was a good thing that potions theory didn't require much, if any, input from Wolfe. Gentle Steps was harder to master than Spark was. The circle itself was simple, but like Flame Armor, there was a level of nuance to its actual casting. Unlike Flame Armor, it would only activate in one very specific way. Getting it right ended up taking Wolfe the rest of the morning and most of his lunch break. He should have a better affinity for unholy magic than he did for gravity, but Wolfe suspected that asking the librarian for books of demon magic wouldn't bring him as positive of a response as looking for the adventurer's handbook or as much help. He would have to be a bit more subtle to obtain that knowledge. After lunch, the witches of Class A returned to their grass-floored lab upstairs and prepared to pick their preferred seat inside their protective circles. It wasn't easy to get inside today, though, as quite a few extra bodies were crowding the hallways. There was a large group of older witches waiting outside as they arrived, whispering and talking amongst their group. Wolfe didn't recognize them from the cafeteria at lunch, so they must not be from Class A and should have potions class now. "Professor, we heard the rumors. Is it true? Did those two lucky first years actually summon an incubus?" One of the gathered upperclassmen asked as the teacher approached the crowd. "You can't have our familiar," Ella called back at them, making the students laugh. "There is no proof that he is a demon of any sort." "Sorry, ladies, the betting pool is still open," the professor told them with a smirk. "Fine, we will find the answer soon enough. Tell us if you decide to share, Ella." "The first-year girls swear he can awaken a witch with a single finger," the student called back in a suggestive tone before the teacher chased them away. There was an ancient superstition that a witch wouldn't completely awaken her powers until she was a full-fledged woman and no longer a maiden, but as far as Wolfe knew, that couldn't be true. Cassie had only talked about bullies, not any romantic partners in her early life. Plus, she was somewhat androphobic when he first met her. If anyone knew the truth about the superstition, it would be the professor, but it also wasn't the sort of thing he could just ask about. While he was considering the superstition, Cassie was considering the rumor about Wolfe's species. The Coven investigator had said that Wolfe would become a demon that matched his power level and personality. So, since he didn't change appearance at all, could he really be an incubus now? Nobody she had talked to really knew what an incubus should look like, only that they were supposed to be attractive to nearly every witch in order to lure in their targets. "All right, witches. You should have been practicing with your study groups. Let's see who has begun to understand flame armor," the professor announced, pulling Cassie from her reverie and catching Wolfe's attention for the first time today. The teacher looked very different today, still the same witch if you were judging strictly by facial features, but significantly younger looking, with deep blue hair and golden eyes. It had to be the result of a potion, but the change was incredible, knocking decades off her apparent age. Nobody else was reacting to it, though, so Wolfe wondered if it was normal for witches to get a glow-up on this level. "Do you have a question, Mr. Familiar?" she asked as she approached the circles where Cassie and Ella were showing their classmates how to change the appearance of the armor. "Do the professors often get a makeover like that?" "Yesterday was very professional, but I like this version much better. The dark blue really suits you," he told her with a smile. "Enough. In the future, if you should happen to see through a glamour spell, please keep your findings to yourself. No witch likes to have their true appearance spoken of in public," she informed him in a haughty tone. How was he supposed to know, though? It wasn't like he could tell when he saw through a glamour. He thought she used a potion. "What was dark blue?" Reiko asked, but was glared down by the professor. Wolfe made a locked motion over his lips, but the damage was done. Now everyone was wondering if the teacher was secretly wearing makeup or a sexy outfit and just hiding it under an illusion spell to seem more professional. "Most of you have a long way to go on the flame armor spell, but Cassie, Ella, Reiko, and Mary, you can begin on the flame strike spell starting tomorrow. The rest of you, do your best to get caught up since your classmates were kind enough to give you pointers to start the class today." The professor instructed the class to end the day. "Study meeting after dinner?" Ella asked Reiko before they left the room. "Sure, we can meet in the practice room and work on flame strike. I think it should be an easy one for me," Reiko replied happily, petting her familiar flame. This first week really was his time to shine, though Wolfe did wonder if Reiko was actually able to make the best use of his abilities since they didn't understand each other very well. The practice rooms were incredibly busy when they arrived, filled with advanced students refreshing their skills and working on new spells to get ahead on their coursework to begin the semester. Now that they were past the first year and officially commoner witches, the grades that they got mattered even more, as it would determine their future noble ranking if they could pass the second year. The room was arranged into a string of hallways, where a group of 2 or 3 students could cast spells toward a target at the end in relative safety, but that meant it was also very loud. While the one casting was within a barrier, they could still talk out to their companions in the chairs outside, and that meant 100 voices talking at once about their class work. It was a great learning opportunity, though, and Wolfe watched with interest as the witches drew and discussed various spell circles on the whiteboards outside each station. Wolfe was also very popular here, with the rumor going around that he was actually an incubus, a species of demon that was known to be able to boost any witch's power by alternative meditation techniques. Wolfe himself found it much more amusing than Ella and Cassie, who were attracting equal amounts of attention for their rumored high compatibility with that kind of familiar. Ella stopped to give Wolfe instructions once they found an empty bay. Today, we will also be practicing remote mana collection. You will remain outside the barrier while we cast, and both Cassie and I will draw mana through you. It's a good habit to get into later, and you can strengthen the bond with the one that isn't in the hall. Flame Strike shouldn't be too dangerous, as the first attack they learned, but for some reason, it was in the very back of the spellbook. Firebolt was the second spell in the spellbook, and it was way easier than the spell that they were instructed to learn. It's a prank the teachers play on overachievers, letting them suffer for a night with an impossible spell to bring their ego down a peg. You can just start with Firebolt. The imp familiar of a witch in the next lane whispered to Wolfe. It will be funnier if I can actually teach them Flame Strike, Wolfe whispered back. The imp smiled and tapped him on the head, then returned to his witch like nothing had happened. Spell learned, Demonic Flame Strike. This one was much different than the one in the book, more sinister, and it used runes that didn't correspond to the fire element. It must be an unholy type spell, but one that mimicked the regular fire element spell. Flame knows the spell, so Reiko, why don't you go first? Hold him and give him permission to cast while sharing your mana flow. According to the notes in the study guide that we borrowed from the library, it will let you see the spell activating, even if you can't see through your familiar size yet. Wolfe suggested. Cassie's decision to keep this second handbook with all of the handwritten notes in it turned out to be a very good choice. It contained a lot of tricks that the new books didn't. The curvy blonde noble stepped forward with the red lizard sitting on her shoulder. The group watched as the little lizard stood on his hind legs and made grand gestures, and then extended his tongue toward the target, which burst into a thin pillar of fire. I don't think you can use his focusing gestures, but you should have been able to sense how he activated the spell, right? Wolfe asked. I think so. I got a bit distracted by his dance. Reiko agreed while Flame made a frustrated gesture at her inability to appreciate his genius teaching method. Reiko's first attempt failed to do anything, but the second made an anemic column of fire at the far end of the hall. It's a flame strike for sure. It just needs more mana to look impressive. The witch in the next bay congratulated her, and the imp nodded along happily. If you could move as much mana as my witch, it would be a very impressive spell. The imp informed Reiko with a mischievous smile. I don't suppose you could demonstrate so we could see it done? Ella asked. Sure. I'm pretty good with fire magic. The second-year student agreed, her violet eyes lighting up in excitement over being asked to help. The study group moved over so they could see her spell, and the witch deliberately formed it slowly and externally, letting everyone watch as she went through the stages of activation. An impressive flame strike, as thick as the witch's torso, lit up the hallway, burning light yellow instead of the deeper red of Flame or Reiko's strike. The imp narrated the lesson for them. Did everyone see? The trick to increasing the heat is in the activation. The size is dependent on mana usage until you can reach your target size and use the excess mana to increase density. Since you're all new students, it's impressive if you can do it at all. You should also remember that the familiars are always better with their innate elements than a witch at the same power level, since the power is theirs and not borrowed or adapted. The second-year student looked proud of herself, but the imp continued. But if she would just agree to finish with the fingers snap, it would work so much better. That is not part of the spell, just your own dramatic nature. The witch insisted. It is really necessary, I swear. Ask the big guy. He can use fire magic. The imp insisted. Wolfe, will you prove this little demon wrong? A finger snap does nothing. The student insisted. If my witches don't mind, I don't mind. Wolfe agreed. Let's see it. Can you even use flame strike, Wolfe? Cassie asked. I never have, but how hard could it be? Just hold my hand like this, and I think we can do it. Wolfe wrapped his left arm around Cassie, holding her left hand, and then extended his right in the same gesture that Flame used. The little lizard looked pleased that someone was following his directions, but frowned when Wolfe began activating demonic flame strike. Mana rushed through him and both of his witches as Wolfe activated the spell with a snap of the fingers on his right hand. The final activation pulled a quarter of his mana reserves dry while Cassie and Ella both gasped at the sensation of mana being rapidly drawn through their auras. Bright white flames roared to life at the end of the hall, and scorching heat reached out to them before the protective spells built into the practice hall normalized the temperature. The pillar wasn't huge, roughly the width of Wolfe's torso, but the intensity was much higher than any spell before it. I think the finger snap is the key for sure. It really helps with the focus. Wolfe informed their tutor with a wink at her imp. I swear you cheated somehow. I've done that spell 1,000 times, and the fingers have nothing to do with it. She mumbled, glaring at her familiar, who was rolling on the floor laughing at her frustration. That wasn't the same spell. They're both playing a practical joke on you. Cassie informed the second-year witch. There is a better flame strike? I don't know if it's better, but that spell Wolfe used wasn't flame-based. I can sense the spell circle as he activates it when we're touching, and there were no fire element runes in the spell he used. Cassie explained. You're going to pay for that later. The witch told her familiar, who was still on the floor, laughing so hard there were tears in the little imp's eyes. You wouldn't believe the things this little demon has done to undermine my confidence. Be careful with that familiar of yours. He looks like he is going to cause a lot of trouble later. She informed Cassie. Have you tried hugs? I've found that they're very effective at keeping familiars in line. Wolfe suggested. Both the witch and the imp looked horrified at the prospect, making Wolfe laugh and Ella shake her head. You have no idea. Wolfe even radiates mana in his sleep, so you never want to get out of bed in the morning. Plus, his mana transfers are glitched out and feel way better than they should. Ella explained. You know, I've heard of 3 different types of familiars that can do that. An incubus, a life fae, or a cursed magi. Either way, you need to be careful. A humanoid familiar is the doom of most witches who summon one. The second-year student replied in barely more than a whisper. Has it happened recently? Wolfe asked, and the witch nodded. 5 years ago, when the seniors who graduated last year summoned their familiars, one of them got a full-grown winged demon. According to the seniors, even the teacher couldn't compel it to obey its summoner, so they were forced to call the headmistress to break the familiar bond and banish it. I don't know if you're aware, but the backlash on the witch from a broken bond is severe. It can destroy their aura and make it nearly impossible for them to rebuild it. She failed out at the end of the semester, so none of the students knew if she ever recovered. That's a bit sad, isn't it? Stronger familiars make stronger witches, but too much of a difference and everything goes wrong. Ella sighed. Wolfe is really strong, though. Just look at how fast we're advancing. Could that just be because he's not mad about being summoned, so he didn't lash out and cause a huge issue? Cassie asked. Wait, you're not mad about being summoned? How does that even work? This guy is still bitter. The second year asked, looking at the imp, who rolled his eyes at her. I get 2 beautiful witches, and the bond will only grow stronger, Wolfe replied with a wink, then gave Cassie, who was still held in his arm, a kiss on the forehead that made her blush. Wolfe, behave, Ella complained before he grabbed her in a hug with the other arm. See, I've got it good, Wolfe told the senior, making her chuckle in amusement at his antics, being quite used to her imp playing pranks to embarrass her. Flame looked up at Wolfe from his spot in Reiko's arms, and then gestured to his own head, demanding that she give him more attention. Even the lizard thinks you've got it too good. The imp pointed out as Reiko petted Flame's head. We should go practice, Flame Strike, so we can show the teacher tomorrow, Reiko suggested, bringing them back to the reason that they were here in the first place. Cassie was up next, and she led Wolfe back to the bench to sit before entering the shielded practice area. We agreed. Today, we practice drawing mana from a distance. Cassie reminded him. Fine, I can wait. Wolfe agreed. Cassie focused on drawing the mana in 4 Flame Strike, and Wolfe began to feel a faint pull as she connected with him. It wasn't nearly as intense or as powerful as when they were touching, but it was surprising to him that she managed it at all on her first attempt. Now that she had made the connection, Wolfe focused on strengthening it and allowing more mana to flow through as she pulled. The gentle tug turned into an easy flow like Wolfe had dug a small stream between them, and Cassie's aura was quickly filling with mana for the spell. Finally, she released it, creating a thin pillar of fire at the target and startling their neighboring familiar. She's pretty good. I'll bet that once you've finished training her, she will be one of the strongest witches in the academy. The imp informed Wolfe with a hint of joy. How many times have I told you it's the other way around? I train you, and if you would just listen, we would both be stronger. The imp's mistress reminded him in a long-suffering tone. You see what I put up with? Every day is the same thing. Just give me mana, more mana. You would think that just once, she would give in and let me have a little fun, but no, she's always got to be in control. Silly witches, thinking that they know the best ways to gain power. The imp complained. So, are you going to listen, or do you think you should be training me? Cassie asked Wolfe as she left the barriers around the target range, panting with exertion from casting the high-level spell. Come here and sit down. The first thing we need to work on is your stamina. One and done just isn't my style. Wolfe teased, pulling Cassie into his lap and gesturing for Ella to go practice. Most witches skip cardio training, thinking that a bit more mana is more important, but spellcasting is physically exhausting when you're using a lot of mana. In that aspect, the sporty group has it right. I go to the gym twice a week to keep in shape. A witch who had just walked up to join their second-year neighbor informed them, totally missing the double meaning of Wolfe's words. I'm Noor, and you all have met Parker. We were roommates last year. So, is the bet won yet? The new girl asked. Wolfe shook his head. They're still trying to decide if demon, fae, or magi is more likely. Most of the students seem to have discounted fae, though, which is a shame. So you're saying you might be fae? Noor asked. I'm not saying I'm not fae. Wolfe agreed. See, this is why it's so hard to find the answers. He only speaks in riddles and sexual innuendo. Parker complained. While they talked, Ella was focusing on her mana draw rates, and Wolfe was working on improving the pathway between them. This time seemed much easier, and Wolfe wasn't sure if it had to do with practice or if their bond was stronger. The difference was small, but it was noticeable, and the reason why it existed intrigued Wolfe. His Magi bloodline, and with it, his aptitude for all things magical seemed to enhance more rapidly when he was closer and more intimate with the witches, while the gland that was becoming his mana focus and his mana density improved with meditation and sharing his stored mana. It wasn't just physically intimate either. When Wolfe felt a pang of affection while Cassie smiled up at him from her spot on his lap, he could also feel their bond growing stronger. The more he cared for these two witches, the stronger the bond became, and the more naturally the transfer of mana between them worked. Every time he emptied and refilled the mana storage, he could improve it a bit more. He drained it at night, which was the mana output that Ella was feeling radiating from him, but if the witches drew from it to build their aura, it would drain much faster and allow him to cycle it more frequently. Wolfe placed both hands on Cassie's bare knees and whispered in her ear, enjoying the reaction he got from their proximity. Since we're here, draw mana from me and enhance your aura. You should be able to do that as the others practice, and it's the fastest way to improve. She looked suspicious and was clearly thinking that he was going to play a joke on her, but once she began to use his stored mana to refine and bolster her aura, she quickly forgot about everything around her. Ella's Flame Strike was nearly identical to Cassie's, impressing both second-year students as well as Reiko, who was holding an animated conversation with Flame, despite the little lizard's inability to speak. That is exhausting. Mary, you're up, Ella declared, then flopped down across Wolfe's lap to place her head on Cassie's thighs. We might have to switch to Firebolt after this. We're all too exhausted after every attempt to continue using Flame Strike. Reiko laughed, seeing the two witches hovering between meditation to work on their aura and simply sleeping. I'll let them know. You and Flame can work on Firebolt for a while until they're ready to go if you're up to it. Wolfe agreed. Firebolt went much more smoothly for everyone. By the time the night's training was over, they had all mastered the spell to an acceptable degree with the help of the senior class witches and were ready to face tomorrow afternoon's class with great confidence. Wolfe nearly had to carry the two witches back up to their dorm room, but eventually they made it, and as they did the night before, Wolfe, Ella, and Cassie shared one bed. But unlike last night, nobody slept. Instead, they all spent the night meditating. Both witches pulled a constant stream of mana from Wolfe to integrate into their aura, which let him constantly refill his capacity. The effect on their bond was incredible. With every hour, Wolfe could feel them growing closer to him until he felt like he should almost be able to sense their hidden emotions, and not just the surface responses. That was normal in a familiar bond, but it took time to develop. The friendly imp from last night's practice used it specifically to annoy his witch, but many familiars used it to gauge what their witch desired. By morning, Wolfe had moved from letting them pull mana passively as they meditated to actively injecting a bit extra so that he could drain his mana pouch more quickly and continue his exercises to increase and condense his mana supply. The pleasurable side effects were just an added bonus to the process. "Wolfe, if you don't stop, I won't be able to hold my voice in," Cassie whispered in his ear, moving his hand from her back to her knee. Wolfe took the opportunity to gently slide a finger up her thigh and was about to move further when the alarm went off, startling Ella from her meditation and reminding them that they had a class to get to. Ella ran her fingers through her tousled blue hair and sighed. "We're never going to get anything done meditating like that." Wolfe didn't understand her concern. Her aura was clearly much denser than it was last night. Perhaps she simply hadn't noticed the change yet, since she hadn't had the chance to compare it to anything. "I will shower first. Get me in 10 minutes if I'm not out." Ella mumbled and grabbed a clean uniform from her dresser before going to the shower. "Now, for breakfast," Wolfe whispered to Cassie, gently pushing her back onto the bed before kissing his way down her body to finish what he had started. The final push of mana that sent Cassie over the edge was matched by a partially stifled scream of pleasure from the other room, so Wolfe gave Cassie one final hug and a swat on the bottom to send her in to shower. Bond level increased. "It was you too. I should have known it. You're both evil, and you owe me for making me feel her emotions through that, Wolfe." Ella shouted the moment a glowing and disheveled Cassie came into the showers. "Turn the shower back on, and we can get dirty before we get clean again," Wolfe suggested, dropping his clean clothes on the counter as he walked in behind Cassie. By the time that shower was finished, they had missed breakfast and were headed to the potions lab at a full-out run so they weren't late for class. The sight of all three with wet hair running through the dorms had the stragglers among the seniors cheering them on, despite having only a slightly shorter trip to their own classes. "Who do you think they've got?" "Ashcroft." One of the second years laughed as the trio ran by. "Those should be the witches from Class A that share a familiar." "So yeah, Ashcroft first thing in the morning. I hope they've got good stamina, or they'll be doing potions detentions all week." Her friend replied with a knowing smirk. Professor Ashcroft was a very good and understanding teacher, but she had a zero-tolerance policy on tardiness without a teacher's note or a very good excuse. Fooling around in the shower would not be an acceptable reason for being late to her class. Wolfe ended up carrying both witches through the last hallway and down the stairs to class, but they were in the door before the buzzer rang and Professor Ashcroft entered from the prep room in the back. "Excellent work, Mr. Wolfe. Your leg strength is truly impressive, but do try to feed your witches before class. I don't need them passing out from hunger. You may go assist the other lab now." The professor admonished him while the other witches from Class A tried to hide their giggles. Once he reached the other lab and had time to sit in his seat by the door, Wolfe took a moment to look over the displayed runes of his inheritance. He was certain that the last 24 hours were highly beneficial, and he intended to make the best of his gains while they were still coming easily. True name: Beowulf Abraxas Asmodai Locarth Noxus. Magi Bloodline 9-12%. Demon Bloodline 1%. Mana Density 10-15%. Mana Focus 1/7 19-29% complete. Lightning Affinity low. Fire Affinity low. Gravity Affinity low. Unholy Affinity medium. Other elements locked due to insufficient bloodline. Familiar Witch LV+1 Ella Mariel. Familiar Witch LV+1 Cassie Noxus. The gains tonight had been incredible, both for him and the witches. If he could keep that rate up for even a few more days, there would be no problems for them during class. But the most interesting part was that their bond had leveled up. This level of familiar bond let them feel each other's emotions when they were nearby, but strangely, it appeared that they felt each other's emotions more strongly than they felt his. Wolfe wondered if it was because they were both on the same side of the bond that they were tied so closely together, but he knew one thing for sure. There would be no sneaking around on one with the other. Their bond was too intense. Even from here in the next lab, separated by a wall of stone and multiple protective spells, he could still feel their frustration as they worked on the potion, and occasional bouts of amusement that might be them sharing a joke. The regular class witches were getting quite a bit better than they had been the first day. The ones who Wolfe had put some effort into awakening could now mostly complete their potions without his assistance, and Wolfe was sent to work with the ones who couldn't use magic at all since he could force mana through them to complete the assignment. There was some hope that this process, repeated for a semester, would help them improve enough to successfully cast the familiar summoning. If they could summon a familiar, it would at least grant them some mana flow, even if they had very little to none of their own, which was a start to becoming a proper witch. Only the Class A witches had all done the summoning on the first day. The regular class would do it in groups, as the teachers determined that they had the capabilities to succeed. But the academy rules wouldn't let them continue training if they didn't meet the standard at the end of the year, so those few who suffered the fate of never successfully summoning a familiar during their training, but who could use some magic, often became apothecaries in the lower floors, selling medicine or potions made by their former classmates. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it allowed them to stay in the academy, with access to academy resources, and keep the hope alive that one day they would increase their powers enough to be recognized as a proper witch. Wolfe counted the witches in the class and wondered what had happened to the rest of the regular class witches from previous years. They either kept very quiet about the skills they learned here, or they never returned to the cities. The math simply didn't add up for that many former students to be floating around the city. Certainly, it was very rare for any of them from the lower floors to come back successfully, though he could see here that many of them could actually use magic, so their families should have been elevated to commoner witch family status. But it was rare for more than 1 or 2 families a year to get that honor throughout the entire city when there should have been at least 1 new commoner witch per floor every year. Wolfe wasn't sure who he could ask and get a real answer, though. Maybe Professor Ashcroft would tell him what he needed to know. She said she intended to protect him when she brought him here before things went crazy, so she might give him at least a hint now that it was clear he was never going back to the city. No more witches managed to awaken an aura today, even with Wolfe's help, though some showed promise for later. The class was over before the last of the students were finished, so the failed potions were set aside as a project for the seniors to deal with, and the class was dismissed to lunch. After lunch, Class A returned to the practical skills room, where the professor happily greeted Cassie, Ella, and Reiko when they came in together. "Did you 3 manage to make any progress on the homework I assigned you?" she asked, pushing up her glasses to stare down her nose at them while ignoring Mary, who appeared to be asleep on top of Pup in the corner of the room. "Indeed we did." Flame, my familiar, was so happy to see a spell named after him that he was incredibly helpful in teaching me the nuances of Flame Strike. Reiko explained. Flame stood up in her arms, thumped his chest proudly, then extended his arm and snapped his fingers as if to say it was something done in an instant. What he really meant was that he thought the finger-snapping theatrics made the spell much cooler, but Reiko ignored the reference, choosing to pet his head instead. She would leave the finger-snapping to Wolfe. "Then please come to the target and show me how close you've gotten to activating the spell." Professor Miranda asked sweetly. Reiko strode confidently to the front of the room and entered the protective circle. This was much closer than the students' practice hallway, and Reiko was a bit concerned about singing herself if the spell worked too well, but it was the largest protective circle in the room, and the target was at the far side. Once she was in place, Reiko pulled as much mana through flame as her aura could hold and let loose the flame strike, creating a thin pillar of fire, but dense and hot enough that the students in the front row could feel the heat it gave off. That was an impressive showing, even with a fire element familiar. Your aura manipulation still needs some work, but it fully formed with only 1 day's practice. Professor Miranda congratulated her. Work on Firebolt. Next. 3 fully formed and stable bolts are the standard for the end-of-term exams. Now, how did the other 2 do? The girls hesitated, so Wolfe spoke up on their behalf. After consultation with Flame, Miss Reiko's familiar, they made great progress. As you know, they both have exceptional aura strength as well. Ella, you're up next. Show me the best flame strike that you can manage. Professor Miranda requested. Ella definitely held back. Wolfe barely felt the draw, but the pillar of fire was still as thick as her leg. The teacher's pride in their accomplishments was evident for anyone to see, though she hadn't actually done anything to help them learn the spell. Cassie, your strength was the highest during the entry exams. I'm looking forward to seeing your abilities. The flame strike she created was no larger than Ella's but more intense, increasing the temperature in the entire room, even with the protective circle in place. She also didn't pull nearly as much as she could have through, and Wolfe was a bit disappointed at the merely envious looks they were getting. He had been hoping for stunned, astounded, even flabbergasted. If they can do it in a day, just because they have good fire affinity, why do the rest of us have to waste weeks learning them instead of spells we actually have an affinity for? Krista Abilene complained. These spells are the very basics every witch should know after they leave the academy for the real world. Every element has a strength and a weakness. If you can only use one element, then even the study trips into the wilderness would be too dangerous for you. Professor Miranda explained in a mildly annoyed voice. This topic clearly came up every year and got the same explanation. Can't you at least let us start with the ones we're good at? Or start with actual witch magic, like plant growth and healing? The Academy is already denying us so much, from our servants to our fashion. Can't we at least not waste time on spells we're never going to use? The High Noble complained. Have you been practicing the other spells outside of class? You have a strong water affinity that wouldn't be very compatible with the fire element training room. Professor Miranda asked her politely. Of course, I can't have your ridiculous teaching method wasting my entire year. The girl retorted. Excellent. Since Cassie is still up front, I will have her learn the next spell in the book. With only 5 minutes of study, she should be able to make the most basic of activations to defend against your water attacks. The professor informed the class. Wolfe came up to study the spell, intending to add it to his repertoire if possible. The spell was Lightning Armor, followed by Lightning Bolt, a pattern that Wolfe assumed would go through all the elements in some sort of order. It was nearly identical to Flame Armor, with only the element changed, so the spell should be easy. Even the mental projections seemed to be the same. Once Cassie nodded that she understood, Wolfe focused on the spell and visualized it activating around her while she shaped the way that it formed and allowed him to do the basic casting to avoid having to spend the energy to use an electricity source like the nearby wall plugs as the elemental reagent for the spell. The effect was interesting, to say the least. Cassie had envisioned a glowing ball gown with a cape in a light blue fabric that crackled with purple electricity. She looked stunning, and Wolfe couldn't help but step back to admire the view. Now, Krista, enter the circle and use your water attacks against Cassie. You will understand why you need multiple elements. Wolfe, please step out of the barrier. For the rest of you, do you see how easy it was for her to learn a new armor spell? Once you know the basic spells thoroughly in one element, activating them in the others becomes much easier. Fire is the first because it is the easiest for most witches to visualize and create. Krista had a haughty look on her face as she entered the circle, but she seemed to have forgotten one very important fact: the way that water interacts with lightning. With a graceful flourish, She sent a stream of water at Cassie's chest, only to be immediately slammed against the barrier by the backlash when it hit Cassie's elaborate armor. Can anyone other than Wolfe tell me why that happened? Professor Miranda asked. Is the lightning armor actually an attack-type spell? One of the students asked. No, but you're on the right track. Is it because impure water conducts electricity better than air, so the lightning armor electrocuted her? Another student guessed. Precisely. Magical water is strong against fire, but weak against mana-derived electricity. The lightning armor, by contrast, has a hard time dealing with earth-type attacks, and lightning attacks do very little to earth armor. That's why you need a variety of skills in your life. The professor explained. With the show finished, everyone increased their efforts at learning the various spells, and the few who hadn't previously caught on to the easiest ways to learn the basics made plans to study the elements that they were best at outside of class hours. The fact they were learning all attack and defense skills to start off their school year when, back in the city, almost all witch magic was used for utility made Wolfe suspect that the Covens were hiding something important from everyone. Learning magical armor first, only for the purpose of going out into the wilderness to gather reagents, didn't make any sense at all as an excuse. Surely the academy wasn't that hard up for materials, and there was a military academy not far away that could provide guards for the witches, who would all be greatly valued by society after graduation. He had already noticed the disparity in numbers between students in the academy and witches in the city, but there should be no need for the low-level witches, many of whom were destined to be very limited in their magical abilities, to be combat-focused unless they were going to be engaging in a lot more battles than any other use of their magical powers. Professor Miranda didn't seem like the sort to just give away secrets if that's what this was, but Professor Ashcroft just might let Wolfe in on the details. He just had to find her when there wasn't anyone else around. Right after the senior class left their afternoon classes, Professor Ashcroft would most likely be alone in her potions lab, either cleaning up or preparing for the next morning's classes, so Wolfe let Ella know that he would be a few minutes behind them. I just need to go ask Professor Ashcroft a few questions before I come up for dinner. I shouldn't be more than 10 minutes behind you, Wolfe whispered. That's fine. We will meet you up there. Ella replied, holding onto a battery and trying to get lightning armor to work the way she wanted. Unlike Cassie, lightning wasn't one of her stronger affinities, so even with Wolfe's attempts at guidance, she was struggling. That was another thing he planned to ask Professor Ashcroft about. A pure-blooded witch like Krista shouldn't have any elemental affinities, Wolfe thought. Or perhaps they were only earth or water, which allied with their innate nature magic. When class let out, Wolfe jogged down the stairs, finding the professor still cleaning her lab as he had suspected she would be. Need any assistance? I was hoping you could help me with a problem I've discovered, Wolfe asked, in case anyone was listening. Sure, just close the door so the fumes won't escape. The professor agreed with a wink. As soon as the door closed, she cast a pair of spells on the room and turned to Wolfe with a questioning look. All right, Spill. You probably have a lot of questions by now. Wolfe considered where to start. The first two are related, so I'll ask them at once. What is happening to all the extra witches that don't return to the city, and why is the entire first-year spell book combat-oriented? Professor Ashcroft sighed and motioned for him to take a seat. The first thing you should know is that the war history you know is a lie. We didn't win the war against the Magi, and neither did the mundane armies of the humans. Nobody won the war. Nobody. When the Magi were down to their last circle of Archmage elders, they set a barrier in the mountains at the center of this continent and began casting grand magic. Their final vengeance destroyed the world, themselves included, and sunk the entire continent to our southwest into the ocean, wiping out the strongest remaining human nations and creating the Demon Sea. The previous damage from the war was all something the witches of the time could deal with. Our nature magic coated the battlefields as fast as they were created. The bombs didn't destroy the world. In the aftermath of their final spell, over 90% of the world's population died, and the elders of the Covens damaged their very bloodlines using forbidden magic in their efforts to keep the world together and end the cataclysm. That was your next query, wasn't it? Why are the witches getting weaker? Wolfe nodded and the professor continued. To say that the mundane humans were upset with the outcome was an understatement. A few sided with the witches and entered the cities, but the rest built their own nations in the north and east, places where witches are as forbidden as Magi. We aren't currently considered to be at war with them, but it's not an easy peace, and the conflicts for habitable land are never-ending. That brings us to your first question. The witches choose to explore, settle new areas, or join the Coven Guard and defend our territories. Morgana Coven occupies the very southernmost point of the continent, with Sylvan and Mer Covens to our north, but most of the land is still unclaimed wilderness, only partially recovered and still full of monsters. Mutants and undead left over from the cataclysm. Especially the frozen wastes of the mountain range in the center of the continent, closest to where the final spell of the war was cast. Very little lives there, other than monsters, and the lingering curses from the war still hold powerful effects that keep anyone from staying there too long. That's why so few of the witches return to the cities. The commoners of the fortress cities don't know because there is an enchantment on the city walls preventing anyone from telling another person about the state of things outside the city. Even if they wanted, those who ventured outside the walls couldn't warn anyone, so like Cassie's grandmother, they prepare the promising ones for the academy, and if they make it through the first year, we tell them the reality. That was a lot to take in. So, realistically, how much do the witches currently hold? Wolfe asked. The three largest covens hold nearly half the continent, in a rim around the frozen wastes of the central mountains, which are still too dangerous for anyone to claim. We are close to the center of witch territory and near the ocean, so it is safe enough for your witches to go out hunting. They're skilled enough that the pressure to join the Coven Guard after graduation will be strong, but you might be able to influence them into another course. I am sure you understand that you personally can never return to the city and that you will never be considered an equal citizen by the Coven, right? Wolfe was well aware of that fact, and it made working for the Coven even less appealing. I hear a lot about these wilderness missions, but what's the point? To prepare them for danger? Wolfe asked. Mostly to gather resources. There are too many of them for us to stock every single thing that a growing witch might desire. Obviously, many of them are needed for potions, but for witches to use most elemental magic, the inscription needs reagents to activate. When you get through the first section of the spellbook, you will see that everything needs an increasingly specific focus or reagent. Armor and raw bolts of elemental energy are all a witch can manage with a generic focus, even after centuries of mixed breeding. Professor Ashcroft replied with a sad look on her face. Wolfe shook his head. We practiced Flame Strike without anything. Yes, I saw. With a fire elemental familiar and a demon familiar who is skilled with fire magic. The other witches in the training room all had pockets full of talismans or a wand to manage the same thing. Krista was going to be livid when she got to that part of the book. But Wolfe realized that he should work on talismans for his witches before they started falling behind. When do the witches start making talismans? He asked, and Professor Ashcroft stopped her cleaning to smile at him. After the end of the first term wilderness mission, but since you have the capability, you can start early if you like. A familiar is considered part of a witch by law, so nobody will stop you from helping them. That is the biggest advantage of having a demon familiar. They know things. Now help me finish this. The rest of the failures should all be safe to mix and dispose of. Wolfe started pouring the failed potions into the disposal, and one final question came to his mind. What actually started the war? Since the rest of what I learned in school was wrong, perhaps you can tell me what was so dangerous about the Magi that they had to be eliminated. Professor Ashcroft shushed him and shook her head. That question must never be asked. Even I don't know the full answer, but before the war, the Magi were hermits. They lived in their clans, built cities of magic, and rarely took visitors. Then something changed. What exactly, that was as likely lost to history or so heavily cursed that those who know can't tell anyone about it, but when the war started, the entire world went to war at the same time, with every other force on the planet allied against the Magi. At the start, the demons were neutral, and very few of them existed in this world, except as familiars to the witches. But by the end, they had defected to the Magi side, and that is why they are shunned by everyone else. You can try asking one of the demonic familiars, but the process of summoning locks away their memories, assuming that they existed before the summoning, as they insist, and weren't created by the spell as most familiars are. When Wolfe arrived at the cafeteria, the table was packed full, with 6 witches waiting eagerly for him. You took too long. Come to the room when you finish eating. We're having a strategy meeting. The seniors of the library club let slip some valuable information. Cassie informed him. Wolfe leaned over to kiss her forehead, then addressed the table. I'll bring snacks when I return. Since the Class A cafeteria was so crowded, Wolfe went to the staff room to have lunch, letting the witches deal with the fallout from his public display of affection. The reception there seemed unusually cold, though. The female staff were as friendly as ever, but the dozen or so men on staff were giving him dirty looks and treating him like a pariah. Wolfe wasn't sure what that was about, but he grabbed a plate and a basket of snacks to go, then picked an empty table. Big plans for the night? One of the housekeepers asked him. Group strategy meeting in our room. The witches think they have discovered something that will let them get ahead of their peers. Wolfe shrugged. I wonder which rumor it is this year? Are there valuable resources hidden and unaccounted for in the courtyard cellars? Maybe it will be the one about how sex with a humanoid familiar will enhance your aura. The housekeeper wiggled her eyebrows and giggled at that one. That actually works, you know. But I wouldn't mind. Have you seen this year's witches? Wolfe joked back, and he was certain he actually heard one of the men growl at him. Ignore them. They're jealous of your living situation. We told them they could try being familiars if they wanted, but they decided to pout instead. A redhead wearing a teacher's assistant badge on her uniform laughed. You know, there is a talisman in the Adventurer's Handbook that is supposed to give 12 hours of unlimited physical stamina. Maybe I should be prepared before I go back, Wolfe suggested, holding up the book with a smile. Behind him, he heard a metal tray hit the wall, and someone stormed out with a shouted, "You all suck." If we did, you'd be in a better mood. The housekeeper snorted in response, then added something to Wolfe's basket and left to get back to her duties. The item she had given Wolfe turned out to be a contraceptive charm, which he pocketed on his way back to the room before anyone saw it. I've got some apple slices and pita chips plus a variety of dips. I hope that works for everyone, Wolfe announced as he walked into the dorm room. He was greeted with the sight of 6 witches arguing over a diagram of a winged Celtic knot with a key dangling below it. I'm telling you, it's a lie. How would you even get the mana in your body to begin with? It's not even close to the circle for mana storage talismans. Reiko argued. Fine, back to the rumors that we can verify. Mary sighed, then crumpled the paper and threw it away. One of the girls from Mary's study group smiled at Wolfe as he set the snacks down. Good timing. They didn't believe me when I told them what the seniors said to me about humanoid familiars. But we can test the one I learned from the practice hall. A witch with an imp told me that there is a circle only demons can use that increases your mana flow, so witches can use more powerful spells while using their familiar as an elemental reagent. She placed the circle on the table, and Wolfe looked it over closely. It was an unholy element spell, but Wolfe had no idea what it was supposed to do. It was slightly incorrect as well, but he could probably fix that. She told you, or her familiar told you while she wasn't paying attention? Wolfe asked. She did. She also said not to trust her imp because he likes to cause trouble. The witch shrugged, but he could see her squirm uncomfortably as she lied. Wolfe was pretty sure the imp gave them this information, so he tried copying it out himself, waiting for the inheritance to provide him with some clue about what he was doing so he could adjust the improper runes. Favor learned. Binds a demon to an agreement for which the price may be demanded at any point in the future. If I didn't agree to help, what would you have done? Wolfe asked. Likely asked the imp. The girl answered, and Wolfe sighed. As a favor, I'll activate that for you, agreed? Wolfe asked. Yes, please. She agreed, and Wolfe activated the spell before anyone could stop her. A small black mark appeared on the palm of her hand, and Wolfe smiled. That spell is called Favor. Demons use it to bind the gullible to do their bidding. Since we didn't agree to a price, I can ask for anything. No way does it work like that. The witch began, then looked at her hand. If I had asked the imp to cast that spell, he could have done anything? she managed after a moment. I don't know the limits, but there is a reason you don't ask demons for favors. Wolfe agreed. Man, I had hoped it would actually increase mana flow. Mary sighed. There was a way to do that. It was right in their textbook. The more mana you drew from your familiar, the stronger the connection got. Mary must not want to wait for the bond with Pup to increase at a normal rate. Pup, why don't you force some mana into her to expand the connection? Wolfe asked Mary's fluffy white familiar. Pup gave Wolfe a look of annoyance, so he assumed the dog didn't have the ability or possibly the inclination. Your call, but I bet it would have led to extra cuddles and snacks, Wolfe told the big dog, who only whined at the lack of treats. Wolfe, I think you should focus on the important things first. Ella began to say, but was interrupted by a distraught young witch. What are you going to do to me? This mark is making me really nervous, because you said you can ask for anything anytime. The witch who Wolfe bound with favor pleaded. Fine, first I will ask for suggestions. What is the appropriate punishment to remind you not to underestimate demons just because they are familiars? Wolfe asked the room. The answer is no, Wolfe. Ella insisted. But I haven't even gotten a chance to suggest anything yet. The answer is still no. If you want to do that, you ask us. Ella insisted, then blushed when she realized the others had no idea what she was expecting him to ask. The thought actually hadn't crossed his mind. Sure, the witch was cute, but that was it, just generically cute. With Cassie and Ella around, the number of stray, inappropriate thoughts in Wolfe's mind had dramatically dropped. All right, suggestions other than what Ella was thinking? Wolfe asked. Have her fetch lunches all week, Reiko suggested with a smirk. The lunch lines were always long since everyone got to the cafeteria at the same time. Mary dug through her bag and pulled out a pair of fluffy ears on a headband and a tail. Can we please? She asked. Not a bad idea. Wolfe agreed. Anything else? Wolfe asked. Truth or Dare Extreme Edition? The quietest of the guests, a short and chubby blonde girl, suggested. Oh, I'd change my vote. That is good. Reiko agreed. The witch in question looked a bit mortified at the idea, but she could always choose to give the truth, so the game shouldn't get too out of hand. Wolfe was just planning to scare her, not traumatize the witch after all. Yes, this should be fun. We used to play this game at sleepovers when I was a kid. Ella said with a smile. It is settled then. I am calling in the favor ode. You will honestly answer questions from and completely fulfill the orders of everyone in the room until the game of truth or dare ends. Wolfe ordered, and the witch's hand glowed with a black light. Put on the ears, Mary ordered, passing them over, and the witch immediately put them on her head. That's not how truth or dare works. Reiko reminded her. I was testing a theory. He said to completely fulfill orders until the game ends, not just orders within the context of the game. Mary replied, shrugging off her roommate's concern. You're evil, you know that, right? Reiko asked, and Mary giggled. I will go first. Truth or dare? Reiko asked. Truth. Who was the last person you kissed on the lips? Reiko asked, and the witch pointed to their quiet friend, who was blushing tomato red. Truth or dare? Mary immediately asked. Truth. Was she a good kisser? Mary asked slyly. This time only a pair of head nods served as the answer. This game is trouble as adults, isn't it? Cassie asked, making everyone else giggle. That's why it's so much fun. Only a few more questions to go, and it's all over. Ella consoled the target of their game. Truth or dare? The quietest witch asked, still blushing bright red from the revelation. Truth. Will you do it again? The shy witch asked and got a kiss in return. All right, it's time to end this game before you naughty ladies get any bad ideas. Once the conditions of my turn are finished, the game will end. You will choose dare when I take my turn. Truth or dare? Dare. The witch agreed with a fearful note in her voice. Wolfe leaned in close so the others wouldn't hear his instructions and made his dare. I dare you to take the witch on your left back to your room and tell her every secret thought you've ever had about her. What did you tell them to do, Wolfe? Cassie asked suspiciously as the two witches left the room, leaving their books behind. I will show you later. Now, are the rest of us playing, or do we have more ideas to study tonight? The idea of a spell circle that could increase your mana draw rates was a good one, and it's very similar to how a mana storage amulet works, but I think that a set of talismans to increase spell affinity would be better. So you can cast spells you don't have affinity with more easily. If you stumble over them, it will slow your progress and keep you from learning truly useful spells in your free time. Wolfe explained. Is that even a thing we can do at this point? Mary asked. It is in the book, so you should be able to, even if it's not easy the first few times. Wolfe shrugged. The witches flipped through their textbooks until they found the elemental talismans, but there was one small problem. Each one needed an elemental focus to be used as a reagent. They only had one elemental reagent handy in the form of flame, but they all had good fire affinity. Want me to head to the supply room and find something while you work on the circles themselves? They don't go bad, so we can wait if we can't find reagents for all the elements. Wolfe suggested. Reiko nodded in agreement. It says here that the circle can have varying affinities if you use different quality reagents, so find what you can, and we will make better ones later. Just enough to pass the exams is enough for this round. There is an excursion outside the academy near the end of the term, and we can collect better materials then. And bring back enough for the other two. They might have left early, but this is important. Mary added. Got it. I'll be right back. Wolfe headed out into the quiet halls of the dorms, which were nearly empty, while everyone studied for the evening. Where are you off to so late at night? 2 witches weren't enough, so you needed a little more action. One of the security guards asked jealously as Wolfe left the dorm building. I'm going looking for the cheapest elemental reagents I can find. Wolfe replied, unconcerned about the guard's envy. If you're open-minded, the supply room has what you need. Ask for the bargain box. It's only a few credits. The other guard told Wolfe, then chuckled in anticipation. Whatever was in the box was likely going to be nasty, but if it were cheap and effective, it would be worth it. Wolfe, what's up? Don't tell me that you're finally spending some of the credits you're earning as a teacher's assistant. The supply room staffer, who he recognized from the staff cafeteria, greeted him. Too busy working to spend my riches. I'm actually here for reagents. The study group is making affinity amulets, and the guard suggested the bargain box to get something from every affinity at once. Wolfe explained. They're all from Class A, right? They should be able to make the amulets. The bargain box is 10 credits, and it will do them for 1 attempt per box. But if you spend a bit more, you can get the herbal box for 150, which will be good for 10 attempts. Plus, there are no live maggots. She suggested. That's a much better option. I can't imagine trying to keep live creatures on an amulet while activating a spell is easy. I'll take one of the herbal boxes and hope that's enough to get the job done.